Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash became the new king of Alola. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Crown of Light. The salt-laced air of Melee Island had always tasted of adventure. It was the taste of new beginnings, of journeys waiting just over the horizon. Tonight, however, it tasted of farewell. Ash Ketchum leaned against the railing of the Pokemon School's observation deck, the soft glow of the lanterns painting long shadows across the wooden planks. Below, the farewell party Professor Kukui and Burnett had thrown for him was in full swing. Laughter and music drifted up on the warm breeze, mingling with the gentle lapping of waves against the shore of Hawali City. Pikachu sat perched on the railing beside him, his small black-tipped ears twitching, mirroring the restless energy thrumming through Ash. They had done it. They had conquered the Manalo Conference, and Ash had become Alola's first-ever champion. The title felt good, solid, like a well-earned badge, but it was a capstone, not an anchor. The world was vast, and the itch to see what lay beyond the next sunrise was a familiar, constant companion. Thinking of leaving already? Ash turned, a smile touching his lips as Professor Kukui joined him, holding 2 chilled pineapple juices. He passed one to Ash, his own expression a mixture of pride and a gentle, fatherly melancholy. Just thinking about what's next, Ash admitted, taking a long sip. The juice was sweet and sharp. Galar, I think. I hear the Pokemon there are, different. Strong. They always are, Kukui chuckled, leaning against the railing himself. Every corner of this world has its own strength. But you know, Alola will miss its champion. I'll come back, Ash said, his voice earnest. It wasn't an empty promise. He'd left friends behind in Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and all the regions beyond, but Alola was different. It had burrowed its way into his heart. It felt less like a stop on his journey and more like a destination he hadn't known he was looking for. Here, he wasn't just a challenger, he was part of a family, an Ohana. We know, Kukui said, his gaze softening. But it won't be the same without you trying to see how many Z moves you can cram into a single practice battle. They shared a comfortable silence, watching the party below. Kiawe was locked in a stoic, unblinking staring contest with his Turtonator. Mallow and Lana were trying to teach Sophocles a traditional Alolan dance, with predictably clumsy and hilarious results. His friends. His family. A small, sad sigh escaped Pikachu. Ash reached over and scratched him behind the ears. I know, buddy. It's tough to say goodbye. Pikachu leaned into the touch, letting out a soft, contented cha. Suddenly, the music below stuttered to a halt. The laughter died, replaced by confused murmurs. Ash and Kukui straightened, looking down. The festive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a strange, expectant hush. The wind, which had been a constant, playful presence all evening, had completely died. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Ash's arms stand on end. What's going on? Ash asked, his hand instinctively moving to the brim of his hat. Kukui didn't answer. His eyes, wide with a dawning awe, were fixed on the sky above Mount Lanakila. Ash followed his gaze. 4 distinct points of light were descending from the heavens. One was a brilliant, crackling yellow, another a soft, ethereal pink, a third a deep, verdant green, and the last a solemn, royal purple. They moved with impossible speed and grace, leaving shimmering trails in the darkening sky. They weren't aircraft. They weren't meteors. They were alive. The Tapus, Kukui breathed, his voice barely a whisper. All of them. Down below, the crowd had spilled out from the school grounds onto the beach, their faces upturned, a sea of disbelief and reverence. The 4 beams of light didn't land. Instead, they converged directly above the Pokemon School, hovering 100 feet in the air. A powerful hum vibrated through the very ground, a chord of immense, ancient power. Ash felt Pikachu tense beside him, a low growl rumbling in his chest as sparks began to dance on his red cheeks. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was a declaration. The yellow light, the one Ash knew best, pulsed brighter than the others. Tapu Koko. It descended slightly, a living embodiment of lightning and warrior pride. Then, the impossible happened. Professor Kukui gasped, his hand flying to his throat. His body went rigid, his eyes glazing over with a light that wasn't his own. When he spoke, his mouth moved, but the voice that emerged was not his. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices speaking as one, echoing with the power of thunder, the rustle of ancient forests, the surge of the ocean, and the unyielding strength of the earth. Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town. The name echoed across Hawali City, carrying a weight that seemed to shake the foundations of the island. Every eye, human and Pokemon alike, turned to the observation deck, to the boy frozen in place by the sheer, overwhelming authority of that voice. Ash's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the raw power of the Tapus washing over him, a physical force that was both terrifying and strangely familiar, like the untamed energy of a Z-move amplified 1,000,000 times over. The voice continued, speaking through the vessel of the stunned professor. You have defended this land. You have healed its wounds. You have honored its spirit. You have shown a heart that connects Pokemon and human as one. A wave of images flooded Ash's mind, unbidden. Battling the ultra beasts, soothing the rampaging totems, calming the sorrow of the guardian deities themselves, the bright, explosive joy of his Z-moves, the unwavering loyalty of his Pokemon. They weren't just memories, the Tapus were showing him his own journey through their eyes. A great darkness gathers at the edge of the light, the voice boomed, a note of grim finality entering the tone. A silence that seeks to devour all sound. Alola requires a protector. Not a champion of sport, but a guardian of its very soul. A king. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. King. The word hung in the air, alien and archaic. Alola had kahunas, trial captains. It had never had a king. Not in recorded history. It was a title from myth, from the time before the islands were settled as they were today. The light from the 4 Tapus intensified, coalescing into a single, blindingly brilliant beam that shot down and struck Ash squarely in the chest. It didn't hurt. It was warm, like the first rays of dawn, and filled him with an indescribable energy. The Z-ring on his wrist, the one given to him by Tapu Koko, began to glow, its crystal morphing, reshaping itself from a simple band into something more intricate, more regal, like a miniature, multifaceted crown of pure light. By the will of the land, the sea, the sky, and the life itself, we, the guardian deities, named the Alola's king. The first and only. The Lonomakainana. The ancient title resonated with a forgotten power. Let all who dwell upon these islands know our choice. Then, as quickly as they had arrived, the 4 beams of light shot back into the sky and vanished. The heavy, charged atmosphere dissipated. The wind returned, rustling the palm trees. Professor Kukui staggered, catching himself on the railing, his eyes blinking in confusion as if waking from a dream. What just happened?" he mumbled, looking from his own trembling hands to Ash. But Ash couldn't answer. He stared at his wrist, at the transformed Z-ring now radiating a soft, steady golden light. The world had gone silent, all except for the frantic drumming of his own pulse. King. The silence below broke. It wasn't with cheers. It was with an explosion of noise, a chaotic symphony of confusion, fear, and a rising tide of argument. Some were pointing at him with expressions of awe, others with suspicion. He wasn't one of them. He was an outsider. A tourist, a challenger who had stayed a little longer than most. How could he be their king? The party was over. The Manalo Stadium, site of Ash's greatest triumph, now felt like an execution ground. The stands were packed, but the energy was nothing like the celebratory roar of the league finals. It was a tense, divided murmur. On one side of the vast stadium, people held banners with his face on them, chanting, "Champion! King!" On the other, a stony-faced assembly of Alolan traditionalists stood silent, their arms crossed, their disapproval a palpable force. Down on the field, Ash stood alone with Pikachu. Across from him were the 4 island kahunas. They had convened an emergency council right on the beach, the shouting match echoing into the night. It was Hala, the wise old kahuna of Melee Melee, who had finally silenced the dissent with a single, authoritative proposal. "The Tapus have spoken," he had declared, his voice cutting through the noise. "Their will is the will of Alola. But a king must be more than chosen. He must be proven." He had then turned his steady gaze on Ash. "You will face the kahunas. All 4 of us. Consecutively. No breaks for your Pokémon. If you are truly worthy of the title the Guardians have bestowed, you will show us the strength they see in you." It was an impossible challenge. A grand slam of Alola's strongest trainers, back to back. A gauntlet designed to break him. And Ash, feeling the weight of 1,000 skeptical eyes, the ground shifting beneath his feet, had heard only one word that mattered: battle. It was a language he understood. "I accept," he'd said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the last of the arguments. Now, standing under the bright stadium lights, the reality of that acceptance was setting in. He could feel the exhaustion already creeping into his bones. This wasn't a game. This was for the soul of Alola. "Don't get cocky, kid," a gruff voice muttered from the sidelines. Kahuna Nanu of Ulaula Island leaned against the stadium wall, his arms folded, his customary bored expression hardened with a cynical edge. "This isn't some league match. This is politics. And you just volunteered to be the piñata." Olivia, Kahuna of Akala Island, nudged him sharply. "Have a little faith, Nanu. The Tapus don't make mistakes." Her expression was more conflicted, a mix of excitement and deep worry. Hapu, the young kahuna of Pony Island, stood silently, her gaze fixed on Ash, her face unreadable. She was the one most deeply connected to the land, and Ash could feel her assessing him, weighing his spirit. Hala stepped forward, his bulk casting a long shadow. He bowed formally. "The rules are set. The challenge begins. May the spirit of Alola guide your hand, Ash Ketchum." Ash nodded, his gaze hardening with determination. "Pikachu, you ready for this?" "Pika." His partner's cry was a bolt of pure confidence, the sparks on his cheeks flaring brightly. "This is a long shot, you know." The voice was soft, familiar, and it cut through his battle focus like a cool breeze. Ash turned. Standing just behind the barrier, her face pale but her eyes full of a fierce intelligence, was Lily. She was dressed in the traveling clothes he'd last seen her in, a simple white dress and a wide-brimmed hat, but she held herself with a new, quiet confidence. Her Magyarna stood silently beside her. She had returned. "Lily," he breathed, a genuine, relieved smile breaking through his tension. "When did you get back?" "My boat docked about 2 hours ago," she said, her lips tilting into a small, wry smile. "I was expecting a welcome home party. I seem to have stumbled into a coronation and a public trial instead." Her eyes flickered to the intricate zering on his wrist, then back to his face. "Are you okay?" I don't know," he admitted, the honesty of the moment surprising him. "It's a lot. King. I don't know how to be a king." "Then don't be," she said simply. "Be what you've always been. Be a trainer. Be Ash. That's who they chose." She reached over the barrier and squeezed his hand. Her touch was a small, grounding anchor in the swirling chaos. "I'm here. We'll figure the rest out later." He squeezed back, a wave of gratitude washing over him. "Thanks, Lily." "Hala is first," she said, her expression turning analytical. He'll test your respect for tradition. His Pokemon are powerful, but they're direct. He values strength and honor above all else. Ash nodded, turning back to the field. Lily wasn't just offering support, she was offering strategy. He took a deep breath, his focus narrowing. He was a trainer. This was a battle. He could do this. "Alright, Lycanroc, I choose you," he shouted, throwing the Pokeball. His dusk form Lycanroc emerged in a flash of light, its orange fur glowing under the stadium lights. It let out a sharp, eager bark, its green eyes fixed on Hala's first Pokemon. Hala smirked, a glint of respect in his eyes. A fine Alolan warrior. But can it stand against the pride of Melee? Hariyama, let's go. The hulking fighting-type Pokemon stomped onto the field, its presence immense. The first battle for the crown of Alola had begun. The clash was immediate and brutal. Lycanroc, Accelerock. Ash commanded. Lycanroc shot forward, a blur of orange and white, slamming into Hariyama with blistering speed. But the massive Pokemon barely budged, absorbing the blow with a grunt. Force Palm. Hala countered. Hariyama's huge hand glowed with energy. It swiped at Lycanroc, who dodged back with acrobatic grace. The palm struck the ground where it had been, cracking the packed earth of the stadium field. "Don't let it get set." Ash yelled. "Use its size against it." Stone Edge, close range. It was a risky move. Lycanroc darted in, right under Hariyama's guard, and stomped its paws. Pillars of sharp, blue-glowing rock erupted from the ground directly beneath Hariyama, lifting the giant off its feet and sending it crashing backward. The crowd gasped. It was a clever, tactical strike, using the move in a way few would have expected. Hala's smirk widened. "Impressive. You see the battlefield in layers. But power is absolute." Hariyama, belly drum. Hariyama struggled to its feet, then began to rhythmically slap its own stomach. With each slap, a dangerous red aura flared around it, its attack power skyrocketing to terrifying levels. "He's sacrificing half his health to maximize his attack," Lily murmured from the sideline, her knuckles white. "One clean hit and Lycanroc is finished. We won't give him one." Ash yelled, his mind racing. "Lycanroc, keep your distance. Bite, aim for its legs." Lycanroc became a phantom, weaving and darting around the now slower Hariyama, snapping at its legs and ankles. It was a battle of 1,000 cuts against a single, devastating hammer blow. Hariyama roared in frustration, swinging wildly, but Lycanroc was too fast, too nimble. Ash was conducting the battle like a symphony, pushing his Pokemon's natural strengths to their absolute limit. "Enough of this game." Hala roared, raising his arm and crossing it over his chest in the familiar pose. A brilliant yellow light flared from his Z-ring. "True strength is not in tricks, but in overwhelming force. Let's show him our full power, Hariyama." Hariyama mirrored the pose, gathering the last of its energy. The ground shook as the power of a Z-move began to coalesce around it. "He's going for all-out pummeling." Kukui shouted from the stands. "At that attack level, nothing can survive it." But Ash didn't look panicked. His eyes were narrowed, a spark of inspiration flaring within them. He'd seen an opening. He'd been waiting for this. "Now, Lycanroc," he yelled, striking his own pose, his new Z-ring flaring with a light so bright it outshone the stadium floodlights. "Let's show him our unbreakable bond. Our full power." Splintered storm shards. Instead of a single beam of energy, the Z-power flowed into the ground around Lycanroc. As Hariyama lunged forward, unleashing a furious, world-breaking barrage of fists, the entire field erupted. Dozens of razor-sharp spears of rock, each infused with Z-power, shot up from every direction, piercing the air like a deadly storm. Hariyama's focused assault was broken. The storm of rock shards slammed into it from all sides, disrupting its concentration, its form, and its Z-move. The all-out pummeling dissipated into nothingness as the full force of Lycanroc splintered storm shards crashed down upon the massive Pokémon. There was a deafening explosion of rock and light, and when the dust settled, Hariyama lay defeated in a crater of its own making. Silence. Then, the side of the stadium that had been cheering for Ash exploded. The traditionalists remained silent, but their expressions were no longer dismissive. They were shocked. Ash hadn't just won, he'd out-strategized the kahuna of Melee, turning his own ultimate move against him. Hala recalled his Hariyama, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He looked at Ash, then at the still-glowing Z-ring on his wrist. The Tapus did not choose you for your power alone, he said, his voice full of respect. They chose you for your spirit. It is a formidable thing. He bowed deeply. I yield. The first trial is past. Ash let out a shaky breath, his adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. He gave Lycanroc a grateful pat. You were amazing, buddy. Take a good rest. He recalled his Pokémon, its energy spent. 1 down. 3 to go. He turned, his eyes meeting Lily's. She gave him a watery, proud smile that spoke volumes. The affirmation steadied him as Olivia of Akala Island stepped forward, her expression sharp and competitive. That was a nice trick with the Z-move, she said, her voice ringing with confidence. But tradition isn't my style. I prefer a good, old-fashioned rock-and-roll battle. Let's see how your spirit holds up against overwhelming offense. She threw a pokeball, and a midday form Lycanroc emerged, a mirror to Ash's but sleeker, its eyes burning with raw aggression. Olivia wasted no time. Stealth Rock, she commanded immediately. Her Lycanroc slammed its paw down, and a cluster of sharp, levitating stones appeared, circling Ash's side of the field. A classic, punishing entry hazard. Any Pokémon he sent out would take damage. Nanu's dry voice drifted from the sideline. Smart. She's playing the long game. He can't switch out without paying a price. Ash knew it. This was a battle of attrition. He needed a Pokémon that could stay in and fight, something that could handle the pressure. He looked at his remaining Pokeballs. The choice was risky. It was crazy. But it felt right. Alright, Rowlet, I choose you. The small, round grass type appeared in a flash of light, immediately getting pelted by the sharp stones of Stealth Rock. It let out a pained chirp, stumbling. The crowd murmured in confusion. A tiny, unevolved Rowlet against Olivia's powerhouse team. It seemed like a forfeit. Olivia laughed, though there was no malice in it. Cute, Ash. But playtime is over. Lycanroc, rock throw. Rowlet, up. Ash commanded. Rowlet took to the air, its small wings beating furiously as a volley of sharp rocks shot past where it had been. You can't stay in the air forever. Olivia taunted. Accelerock. Her Lycanroc became a blur, shooting toward the airborne Rowlet. There was nowhere to dodge. Leafage. Ash yelled. Rowlet unleashed a swirling vortex of leaves. It wasn't an attack. It was a smokescreen. The Accelerock shot through the cloud of leaves, but its target was gone. Rowlet had used the brief cover to change its trajectory, banking sharply to the side. He's using its size and flight to his advantage, Kukui observed, leaning forward in his seat. He's turning its weakness into a strength. The battle became a tense game of cat and mouse. Olivia's Lycanroc was faster and infinitely more powerful, but Ash and Rowlet were fighting smarter. They used Feather Dance to drastically lower the Lycanroc's attack power, turning its devastating bites into mere annoyances. They used the stadium lights to their advantage, having Rowlet fly into the glare to mask its movements. Olivia was getting frustrated. Her strategy of raw power was being dismantled by a Pokémon a fraction of the size of her own. Fine. No more games. Let's see you dodge this. She struck the pose, her pink Z-ring flaring to life. The unyielding spirit of Akala Island. Let's crush them. Continental crush. Her Lycanroc howled as it gathered the Z-power. The ground itself began to tremble. High above the stadium, a colossal boulder of rock and earth, the size of a small house, materialized from pure energy. It blotted out the lights, casting the entire field in shadow. There was no dodging that. The crowd was on its feet, screaming. Lily's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Roulette! Ash screamed, his voice raw. The tiny owl Pokémon looked up at the descending mountain of death, then looked back at Ash. There was no fear in its eyes. Only trust. Absolute, unwavering trust. In that moment, something surged through Ash. It was the same energy he'd felt from the Tapus, a connection to the very life force of Alola. His new Z-ring began to pulse with a gentle, green light, a light that felt different from the violent energy of a normal Z-move. It felt like growth. He didn't know what he was doing. He was acting on pure instinct, a trainer's desperate plea to protect his Pokémon. He mirrored Rowlet's trust, pouring all of his own energy, his own hope, his own spirit into the Z-ring. He performed a Z-pose he'd never seen before, one that felt natural, organic, like a flower opening to the sun. Roulette. Let's show them the power of life itself. Bloom Doom. But it wasn't the Bloom Doom he knew. It wasn't a focused beam of energy meant to destroy. As the colossal continental crush began to plummet, the green light from Ash's Z-ring flowed not into an attack, but into the stadium floor beneath it. For a breathtaking second, nothing happened. Then, the ground erupted. Not with destructive rock, but with life. Massive, ancient trees, thick with vines and bursting with blossoms, grew from nothing in the span of a heartbeat. They formed a dense, vibrant jungle canopy directly in the path of the descending Z-move. The continental crush slammed into the makeshift forest with a cataclysmic roar of splintering wood and grinding rock. The trees buckled, they groaned, but they held. The force of the Z-move was absorbed, diffused, and scattered by the sheer, resilient life force of the grove Ash and Roulette had summoned. The giant boulder crumbled into a harmless shower of pebbles and dust. The stadium was utterly silent. No one had ever seen a Z-move used like that. Not as a weapon, but as a shield. An act of creation to counter an act of destruction. Through the settling dust, a small figure shot out of the canopy. Roulette, exhausted but resolute, dove towards the stunned and depleted Lycanroc. Razor Leaf. Ash commanded, his voice hoarse. A final, precise volley of sharp leaves struck Olivia's Lycanroc, and the powerful Pokémon slumped to the ground, defeated. For a long moment, Olivia just stared. She looked at her defeated Lycanroc, at the impossible forest that now stood in the middle of her island stadium, and at the boy and his little owl Pokémon, breathing heavily in the center of it all. A slow, disbelieving smile spread across her face, followed by a sudden, booming laugh of pure, unadulterated delight. "Well, I'll be," she said, shaking her head as she recalled her Pokémon. "You didn't just beat me. You redecorated." She walked to the edge of the newly grown forest and bowed, a gesture of genuine, earned respect. "The second trial is past. You're full of surprises, Ash Ketchum. I can see why they chose you." Ash's knees felt weak. He recalled Roulette, whispering his thanks. Two kahunas down. The weariness was a physical weight now, pressing down on him. He looked over at the sideline. Nanu was no longer leaning against the wall. He was standing, his arms no longer crossed, his bored expression replaced by one of an unsettling, predatory focus. Hapu stood beside him, her gaze intense. The easy part was over. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Lily. She'd somehow gotten past the officials and was standing beside him on the field, a canteen of water in her hand. You were incredible, she said, her voice soft but shaking with emotion. I've never seen anything like that. He took the water, drinking deeply. Me neither, he admitted. I just trusted Rolette. That's what makes you, she said, her eyes searching his. But Ash, this is taking too much out of you. Lycanroc and Rolette are out. You only have 4 Pokémon left for 2 full Kahuna battles. Nanu, he doesn't fight like Hala or Olivia. He doesn't care about honor or flashy moves. He's cruel. He'll exploit every weakness, every sign of exhaustion. Ash looked past her, at Nanu's waiting figure. The Kahuna of Ulaula gave him a slow, mocking smile. Lily was right. This next battle wouldn't be about power or creative strategy. It would be about survival. He was tired. His Pokémon were tired. And the real trouble was just beginning. He capped the canteen and handed it back to Lily, his expression hardening again. Let him try. He was Ash Ketchum. Champion of Alola. And now, something more. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. As he turned to face his third trial, a chill that had nothing to do with exhaustion ran down his spine. He glanced up at the night sky, past the stadium lights. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker, as if one of the distant, pinprick stars had dimmed for just a second, before returning to its normal, steady glow. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of his tired eyes. Far away, on an unnamed, uninhabited spit of black sand and volcanic rock at the furthest edge of the archipelago, the ground trembled. A hairline crack, invisible in the darkness, widened by a fraction of an inch. From the fissure, a thin, oily wisp of violet-black energy, no bigger than a man's finger, seeped out into the night air. It hung there for a moment, silent and predatory, before drifting towards a small patch of hardy seagrass. The moment the energy touched the grass, the vibrant green blades withered instantly, turning a dead, brittle gray, crumbling into dust that the returning wind carried out to a sea that knew nothing of the blight to come. The silence that seeks to devour all sound was waking up. Chapter 2, The Whispering Court. Ash's muscles screamed in protest. The adrenaline from the first 2 victories had evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that felt like lead in his veins. 2 Kahunas. 2 Z moves pushed to their absolute limits. He had only 4 Pokémon left, and standing across the scarred battlefield was Nanu, the Kahuna of Ulaula, whose very presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. The mocking smile Lily had seen was gone, replaced by a flat, predatory emptiness that promised no quarter. You've put on a good show, kid, Nanu said, his voice a low, gravelly murmur that carried across the stadium. You made the old man and the rock star look like amateurs. But this isn't a show. This is a culling. He reached for a pokeball on his belt, his movements slow and deliberate. I'm not here to test your spirit. I'm here to break it. Lily's hand tightened on Ash's arm. Don't let him get to you, she whispered, her voice taut with anxiety. He's trying to throw you off balance. He feeds on despair. Ash took a ragged breath, nodding. He knew. He could feel it. The very air around Nanu felt like the grim quiet of Patown. This was a different kind of fight. Incineroar, let's go. Ash called out, summoning his most physically imposing Pokémon. The massive fire/dark type let out a rumbling roar, flames licking from the belt of fire around its waist. Its sheer power was a comfort, a bulwark against the creeping dread Nanu projected. Nanu's lips twitched, a shadow of a smirk. Fire and fury. How predictable. He tossed his pokeball underhanded. Crocodile, your meal is served. The imposing ground/dark type emerged, its body low to the ground, its eyes hidden behind a black, membranous shield that gave it a perpetual, menacing glare. The type advantage was obvious and brutal. Incineroar's fire was all but useless. He's baiting you, Ash, Kukui muttered from the stands, gripping the railing. He wants you to fight on his terms. Incineroar, Darkest Lariat. Ash commanded, opting for a powerful physical assault. Incineroar roared and charged, spinning like a fiery cyclone. But Crocodile was unnervingly fast. It didn't meet the charge head-on. It ducked, sinking partially into the ground with Dig. Incineroar's attack hit nothing but air, throwing it off balance. Now, Nanu said quietly. The ground beneath Incineroar erupted as Crocodile burst from below, slamming its powerful snout into the larger Pokémon's midsection. The super-effective blow sent Incineroar flying, crashing hard against the far wall of the stadium. It struggled to its feet, wincing, a deep tremor running through its body. Don't give it a second to recover. Ash yelled. Flamethrower, at the ground. It was a desperate, instinctive move. Incineroar unleashed a torrent of fire, not at Crocodile, but at the stadium floor, melting the packed earth into a patch of semi-molten slag. Nanu actually looked surprised for a second. Clever. Trying to prevent it from using Dig. His expression soured again. It won't save you. Crocodile, Stone Edge. Crocodile slammed its tail, and pillars of sharp rock erupted around Incineroar, penning it in, the sharp stones jabbing at its legs and sides. It was trapped. Finish it. Outrage. Crocodile's eyes glowed a furious red as it charged, a berserker fury taking over. It crashed into the trapped Incineroar, a devastating flurry of claws and bites. Ash could only watch, his fists clenched, as his powerful Pokémon was overwhelmed. After a brutal, one-sided assault, Incineroar slumped to the ground, defeated. A hush fell over Ash's supporters. That was fast. That was cruel. Nanu hadn't just won, he had dismantled one of Ash's strongest Pokémon with cold, calculated efficiency. Ash recalled Incineroar, the red light of the Pokeball feeling heavy in his hand. You were great, he whispered. Get a long rest. 3 Pokémon left. Nanu hadn't even broken a sweat. Who's next, Your Majesty? Nanu drawled, the honorific dripping with sarcasm. Another powerhouse for me to take apart. Ash's jaw tightened. He couldn't afford to lose another Pokémon so quickly. He needed something that could change the flow of this battle, something Nanu wouldn't expect. He looked down at the last remaining partner on his shoulder. Pikachu's cheeks were sparking furiously, his little body trembling with a mixture of anger and anticipation. It's not time yet, buddy, Ash murmured, placing a hand on his head. We need to wear him down first. He took a deep breath. Meltan, I choose you. The tiny, hexagonal steel type materialized on the field, its single red eye blinking. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the stadium. Against a ground-type specialist. It was madness. Nanu let out a short, barking laugh. Are you forfeiting? He asked, genuinely amused. Or has the pressure finally cracked your brain? Meltan, flash cannon. Ash commanded. Meltan's eye glowed, and it fired a beam of shimmering silver energy. Crocodile, with a flick of its tail, kicked up a wall of dirt that harmlessly absorbed the attack. My turn. Earthquake. The stadium groaned as Crocodile stomped its foot. A violent tremor ripped through the field, a wave of destruction rolling straight towards the tiny steel type. Harden. Ash yelled. Meltan's liquid metal body solidified, its defense shooting up. The earthquake hit it like a tidal wave, tossing it into the air, but when it landed, it was bruised but intact. The move had done shockingly little damage. Nanu's smile faded. He was starting to understand. Meltan, headbutt. Ash ordered. The tiny Pokémon shot forward, ramming into Crocodile's leg. It was like a pebble hitting a mountain. Crocodile didn't even flinch. It just looked down, annoyed, and swiped Meltan away with its claw. It's not working, Ash. Lily cried out, her voice filled with panic. You can't damage it. I don't have to, Ash said, his eyes narrowed in concentration. As Crocodile had swiped Meltan away, the little steel type had latched onto its leg, its liquid body clinging tight. And it was doing what it did best. It was eating. Crocodile let out a roar of confusion and pain, shaking its leg. A small, but noticeable, patch of its tough, scaly hide had been corroded, eaten away by Meltan's powerful digestive acids. Nanu's eyes widened. Get it off. Use crunch. Crocodile bent down, its powerful jaws snapping at the little parasite on its leg. But Meltan, with a command from Ash, let go, zipping away just as the jaws snapped shut. The battle turned into a bizarre and frustrating ordeal for Nanu. Meltan was too small to hit reliably, and its defense was too high for even Earthquake to be a one-hit KO. It kept zipping in, taking a small bite out of Crocodile's hide or the metal clasps on Nanu's own belt, and then zipping away. It wasn't a battle, it was an infestation. This is pathetic. Nanu snarled, his composure finally cracking. Fight me properly. We are fighting, Ash countered, a grim smile on his face. We're just not fighting the way you want us to. Finally, Nanu had enough. Fine. If I can't hit you, I'll hit everything. Crocodile, return. He recalled his furious Pokemon and threw another ball. Sableye, let's go. The small, purple goblin-like Pokemon materialized, its gem-encrusted eyes glittering mischievously. With no weaknesses and immunity to fighting-type moves, it was a notoriously tricky opponent. Sableye, Shadow Ball. Nanu commanded instantly. A sphere of ghostly energy shot towards Meltan. Dodge and use Headbutt. Ash called. Meltan dodged, but the Shadow Ball swerved unnaturally in mid-air, tracking it and slamming into its back. Meltan cried out, the super-effective move doing significant damage. He's a master of trickery, Gladian's voice commented coolly from somewhere in the stands, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. He doesn't need brute force. Sableye, use Confuse Ray. Nanu pressed. A bizarre, shimmering light shot from Sableye's eyes. It hit Meltan, and the little Pokemon's movements became erratic. It started spinning in place, its eyes swirling. Now, Power Gem. Beams of brilliant, crystalline light shot from Sableye's gem eyes, striking the confused Meltan repeatedly. It was too much. The small steel type slumped, defeated. Ash recalled it, a surge of pride swelling in his chest. The tiny Pokemon had taken out one of Nanu's aces through sheer, stubborn annoyance. It had done its job perfectly. 2 Pokemon left. The games are over, Nanu said, his voice cold again. You're tired. Your Pokemon are tired. And now, you face my ace. The pride of Ulaula's shadows. He recalled Sableye and held up his final Pokeball. Let's see how your kingly light holds up against this. He threw the ball, and his Alolan Persian strutted onto the field. Its sleek, dark fur and unnervingly large, round face gave it an air of condescending arrogance. But Ash knew its reputation. It was incredibly fast and deceptively powerful. He had 2 Pokemon left, a tired Pikachu and a Naganadel he hadn't used in months. The choice was clear. Naganadel, I choose you. The sleek, alien-like Ultra Beast appeared with a high-pitched cry, its massive stinger abdomen pointed menacingly. Its very presence shifted the energy in the stadium. It was a being of another world, radiating an aura of potent, toxic power. Nanu's eyes narrowed. An Ultra Beast. How fitting that an outsider king would rely on an alien. Naganadel is my friend. Ash shot back. And we're going to win this. Sludge Bomb. Naganadel fired a volley of toxic sludge, but Persian moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark fur, dodging every single glob. Dark Pulse, Nanu said calmly. Persian's eyes glowed, and it unleashed a wave of dark, ringed energy. The attack was so fast Naganadel had no time to dodge. It cried out as the super-effective move slammed into it. Don't let up. Power Gem. Nanu commanded. The gem on Persian's forehead glowed, and it fired a concentrated beam of energy, striking Naganadel again. Ash's Ultra Beast was being completely overwhelmed by the smaller Pokémon's speed. Naganadel, X-Scissor. Naganadel crossed its arms, its stingers glowing green, and dove towards Persian. Too slow, Nanu sighed. Dodge, then use Thunderbolt. Persian sidestepped the attack effortlessly, and with a flick of its head, unleashed a powerful bolt of electricity that struck Naganadel mid-lunge. The Ultra Beast seized up, crashing to the ground, paralyzed and severely weakened. It's over, Nanu declared. Finish it with Dark Pulse. As the dark energy gathered around Persian, Ash saw it. A flicker of arrogance in the Pokémon's eyes. A moment of stillness as it charged its final attack. Now, Naganadel. Ash roared, pouring all his remaining energy into the command. Dragon Pulse, at your own feet. It was an insane, desperate gamble. Naganadel, shaking off the paralysis for a split second, aimed its massive stinger at the ground and fired a colossal, multicolored beam of draconic energy. The explosion was immense. It didn't just kick up dust, it propelled Naganadel high into the air, a makeshift rocket launch that sent it tumbling out of the path of the Dark Pulse and high above the stadium. What? Nanu was genuinely stunned. Now! Ash screamed, pointing down at the shocked Persian. Use the momentum. Thunderbolt. Naganadel, still falling, twisted its body and fired a bolt of lightning from its stingers. It wasn't its strongest move, but from that height, with gravity adding to its velocity, it struck the unprepared Persian like a spear of pure electricity. Persian shrieked, its fur standing on end, and collapsed in a heap. Naganadel crashed to the ground a moment later, its own energy completely spent, and fainted. A double knockout. Ash sank to one knee, panting. He had no Pokémon left in reserve. Only one. Nanu also had only one Pokémon left. His Crocodile, which had been damaged by Meltan. It all came down to this. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice raspy. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, landing softly on the broken field. His small body was a beacon of defiant energy in the weary silence. Across the field, Nanu sent out his Crocodile. The big Pokémon looked tired, and the corroded patch on its leg was still visible. So, it comes down to the mascot, Nanu said, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. Fitting. There were no more tricks. No more mind games. This was it. Pikachu, Electroweb. Ash commanded. Pikachu fired a net of electricity, aiming not for Crocodile, but for the ground around it, trying to slow it down. Bulldoze, Nanu ordered. Crocodile stomped, and a wave of energy tore through the ground, ripping the Electroweb apart and rolling towards Pikachu. Iron Tail, on the ground. Jump. Pikachu's tail glowed like steel. He slammed it into the ground, using the impact to vault high into the air, clearing the Bulldoze attack. Thunderbolt. Ash yelled. From the apex of his jump, Pikachu unleashed a massive bolt of lightning. It struck the weary Crocodile dead-on. The big Pokémon roared in pain but remained standing, shaking off the electricity. You're out of options, kid, Nanu said. It's over. Crocodile, Earthquake. As Crocodile gathered its power for the final, field-wide attack, Ash closed his eyes. He felt the exhaustion, the pain, the weight of the 3 impossible battles. But underneath it all, he felt something else. The unwavering trust of his partner. The expectant hush of the crowd. The warm hand of Lily on his arm just moments ago. The very spirit of Alola, watching him. His new Z-ring flared to life, not with the light of any one type, but with a rainbow corona of pure, untamed energy. He didn't need to think of a pose. He just moved, his body and Pikachu's syncing in perfect, unspoken harmony. Let's show him everything we've got. Ash roared, his voice echoing with renewed strength. Our full power. Our bond. 10 million volt thunderbolt. Pikachu soared into the air, not just jumping, but propelled by the sheer force of the Z-power coalescing around him. A storm of multicolored energy, the power of all of Ash's hopes and dreams, gathered in the sky. He unleashed it in a single, cataclysmic blast that was less a bolt of lightning and more a river of pure, incandescent power. It hit Crocodile just as the earthquake began. The two forces met, and for a heart-stopping second, the world was nothing but blinding light and screaming sound. Then, the Z-move tore through the earthquake, through Crocodile, and through Nanu's last defense. When the light faded, Crocodile was unconscious. Nanu stood staring, his usual black coat singed at the edges, his face utterly blank. Ash fell to his knees, every last ounce of strength gone. Pikachu, equally spent, scampered over and collapsed into his lap. Nanu recalled his Pokémon. He walked slowly across the field, stopping in front of the kneeling boy. He looked down at him, at the exhausted Pikachu, and then at the cheering, weeping, screaming crowd. The Tapus, he said, his voice quiet and devoid of its earlier mockery, are idiots. He paused. But they're not wrong. He turned and walked away without another word, signaling his defeat. The third trial was passed. Hapu, the final kahuna, stepped forward. Her expression was solemn. You are exhausted. Your Pokémon are spent. I will grant you 1 hour to recover before we begin. Ash looked up, shaking his head. No. We finish this now. To stop would be to admit defeat. The momentum, the spirit of the challenge, would be broken. He struggled to his feet, Pikachu still in his arms. I have 1 Pokémon left. And he's ready. He looked towards the entrance tunnel where his other Pokémon were being cared for. A familiar, dark figure emerged from the shadows. Gladden. He wasn't looking at Ash. He was looking at Hapu, a silent challenge in his eyes. But Ash knew he wasn't there to interfere. He was there to watch. Ash turned back to Hapu. Let's do this. Hapu nodded, her respect for his tenacity clear on her young face. Very well. The land itself will be your final judge. Golurk, stand for pony. A towering, ancient golem materialized on the field, its footsteps shaking the stadium. It radiated an aura of immense, timeless power. Ash gently placed Pikachu on Lily's lap as she rushed to the barrier. Keep him safe, he whispered. He turned back to the field, taking his final Pokeball. His arm felt like it weighed a ton. I only need 1, he yelled, finding a final reserve of strength. Charizard, I choose you. His magnificent Kanto starter emerged with a deafening roar, a stark contrast to the Alolan Pokémon he'd used so far. It was a statement. He wasn't just Alola's champion, he was Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town, and his journey, all of it, had brought him here. The final battle was a contest of pure, elemental fury. Hapu's Golurk was a fortress, its body shrugging off Charizard's flamethrowers and dragon claws. But Charizard, a veteran of countless legendary battles, was a master of aerial combat. It weaved through the golem's powerful dynamic punches and heavy slams, a dance of fire and flight. Finally, Hapu made her move, her Zering flaring. The unyielding earth of Pony. Tectonic rage. Golurk slammed its fists into the ground, and the entire stadium floor split open, a fissure of raw, earthen energy racing towards Charizard. Ash met the challenge, his own Zering flaring one last time, though its light was weaker now. He performed the pose for the Flyinium Z, this is everything. Supersonic Skystrike. Charizard folded its wings and dove, cloaked in a blinding aura of wind and power, straight into the heart of the fissure. The collision of Z moves was apocalyptic. The stadium shook to its foundations. For a moment, the world was white. When vision returned, both Pokémon were still standing, battered, bruised, but refusing to fall. They were running on fumes, on pure willpower alone. "It's not over," Hapu said, her voice strained. "No, it's not," Ash agreed, breathing heavily. They stared each other down, trainer and trainer, Pokémon and Pokémon. Then, slowly, with a great, groaning sound of stressed stone, Galark knelt, then tipped over, defeated. Charizard roared in triumph, a plume of smoke rising from its maw, before it too collapsed, its energy utterly spent. Ash Ketchum had done the impossible. He had defeated all 4 Kahunas in a single, grueling gauntlet. He stood there for a moment, swaying on his feet, before his legs finally gave out. He didn't hit the ground. Strong arms caught him. He looked up into the proud, tear-streaked face of Professor Kukui. The entire stadium, even the stern traditionalists, was on its feet, a thunderous, unified roar of applause shaking the very island. He was no longer an outsider. He was theirs. 2 days later, the world smelled of antiseptic and ocean breeze. Ash woke to the soft hum of advanced machinery and the sight of a pristine white ceiling. He was in the medical wing of the Ether Paradise. Lily sat in a chair by his bed, asleep, her head resting on a thick, open book bound in ancient leather. He sat up, his body aching but whole. Pikachu was curled up at the foot of the bed, still deep in a restorative sleep. He looked at Lily, at the peaceful expression on her face, and a feeling of profound gratitude washed over him. She had been there. Through all of it. He gently took the book from her lap before she could drop it. The script was ancient Alolan, the pages filled with dense, looping characters. The title, roughly translated, read, "On Rites of Ascension and the Lonomaka-Inanna." She was already working. Already trying to navigate the impossible situation he'd landed in. As if sensing his gaze, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Ash. You're awake." She sat up straight, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. "I was just, researching." "I can see that," he said, his voice a little hoarse. He smiled. "Thanks, Lily. For everything." "Of course," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fought 4 Kahunas at once," he admitted with a wry grin. "But I'm okay." He looked around the sterile room, then out the large window at the shimmering blue water surrounding the artificial island. "Why are we at Ether Paradise?" "It was my suggestion," she said, her expression turning serious. "And my mother agreed. The Pokémon school is too public. Your home at Kukui's is too vulnerable. This place, it's secure. It's neutral. And if you're going to be a king," she said the word as if still getting used to it, "you need a court. A place to govern." The door slid open, and Lily's mother, Luzamin, walked in, looking as immaculate as ever, though her usual serene smile was tinged with a weary professionalism. "He's awake." "Excellent," she said briskly. "Because your first challenge as king has arrived." She gestured, and a nervous-looking Ether employee wheeled in a holographic display. "A delegation. They represent the bold families of Alola. The original landowners, the merchant guilds, the ones whose wealth predates the Pokémon League by centuries. They do not recognize the Tapu's authority in matters of state, and they certainly do not recognize an off-islander as their ruler. They are demanding an audience." Ash exchanged a look with Lily. The battle at the stadium had won him the hearts of the people, but it had only angered the powerful. "When?" Ash asked, swinging his legs out of bed. "They are waiting in the main conference hall," Luzamin said. "They have been for an hour." An hour later, Ash walked into the conference hall. He wasn't wearing a crown or robes, just his usual clothes, freshly washed. Pikachu was back on his shoulder, looking alert and wary. Lily walked beside him, holding a datapad. The 4 Kahunas, Kukui, Burnett, and his friends were arrayed behind him, a silent show of support. The delegation consisted of about a dozen men and women, all dressed in expensive, traditional Alolan finery. They sat at the far end of a long, polished table, their faces masks of polite disdain. Their leader appeared to be a stern, hawk-faced woman with silver hair tied in an intricate knot. She introduced herself as Lady Kahale. "So," she began, her voice smooth and sharp as glass, "this is the boy the spirits have chosen. You have caused quite a stir, Ash Ketchum." "The Tapus chose me to protect Alola," Ash said, his voice calm and even. He remained standing, choosing not to sit at the head of the table. He would not play by their rules. "A noble sentiment," Lady Kahale said, a condescending smile touching her lips. "But protection requires more than spirited battles. It requires resources. Governance. An understanding of our laws and traditions, laws which you have so flagrantly ignored." She gestured to one of her companions, who slid a heavy tome across the table. "The Anuula Accords, ratified 400 years ago," she explained. "They state that any matter of all-island governance must be ratified by a council of hereditary landholders. That would be us. The Tapu's decree is spiritually significant, but legally, it is meaningless." "You're saying the Tapus have no say in how Alola is run?" Kiawe blurted out, his voice hot with anger. Lady Kahale gave him a withering look. "The Tapus protect the island's spirit. We ensure its people do not starve. For centuries, our families have managed the shipping lanes, the crop yields, the economy. An economy that will grind to a halt if its leaders are not confident in the current political climate." It was a threat, veiled in polite language. They would strangle the island's economy if they didn't get their way. Ash listened, his eyes moving from face to face. He saw the arrogance, the entitlement. But he also saw the shared, nervous glances, the way Lady Kahale's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. He read them the same way he read a trainer in a battle. Their strength, their wealth and influence, was also their biggest fear, losing it. He let the silence stretch, the tension building. The nobles began to look uncomfortable. Finally, Ash spoke. "You're right." The room went still. His own friends looked at him in shock. "You're right," he repeated, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that silenced all dissent. "I don't know your laws. I don't know how to manage shipping lanes. And you're right that Alola needs more than just a strong battler. It needs to be protected in every way. Its people. Its Pokémon. Its wild places." He began to pace slowly in front of the table. "I was on Ulaula Island once. In the deep jungle. I saw a Pokémon, a Vimpod, trapped in a rockfall. Its family couldn't get to it. No one was around for miles. It was scared. It was alone. My friends and I, we helped it. It was a small thing. But it mattered to that Vimpod." He stopped and looked directly at Lady Kahale. "Your families control the wealth of Alola. You are the most powerful people in this room. That's not a privilege. It's a responsibility. A responsibility to every person and every Pokémon who lives here, from the busiest city to the deepest jungle." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. His expression was open, charismatic, and utterly unyielding. "So, I am issuing my first decree as Alola's protector. We are establishing a new, region-wide service. The King's Rangers. They will be tasked with emergency rescue, disaster relief, and the protection of our wild Pokémon habitats. They will be stationed on every island, equipped by the Ether Foundation." He straightened up, a bright, confident smile on his face. "And they will be funded by you." The nobles stared at him, dumbfounded. "A protector's tax," Lily added, her voice clear and precise as she stepped forward, tapping her datapad. "A small, modest percentage of all commercial profits and landholdings above a certain value. A contribution to ensure the safety and stability of the very land that grants you your prosperity." Your first payment, as the most prominent benefactors, will be due at the end of the month. The trap had been sprung. Ash hadn't bowed. He hadn't argued their laws. He had created a new reality, one where their wealth was not a weapon to be used against him, but a duty they were now legally and publicly obligated to fulfill. To refuse would be to publicly declare that they cared more for their money than for the safety of Alola. He had called their bluff on a magnificent scale. Lady Kahale's face was a mask of cold fury. This is an outrage. You have no authority. The kahunas have recognized my authority, Ash said, gesturing to Hala, who nodded grimly. The people have recognized it. And the Tapus have commanded it. Your accords are 400 years old. My decree is for the Alola of today. He looked at his friends. Kiawe. Lana. Mallow. Sophocles. I want you to be the first leaders of the Rangers. To build it from the ground up. Their faces lit up with shock, then with fierce, passionate purpose. They had a role. A real, tangible way to help. The nobles were speechless, outmaneuvered and furious. They stood up, sputtering threats, and stormed out of the room. Ash watched them go, his smile fading. He had won the battle, but the war for control of Alola had just begun. That night, as the twin moons cast a silver glow over Ether Paradise, Ash stood on a balcony overlooking the sea. The victory felt hollow. He'd made powerful enemies. A soft footstep approached from behind. They'll be back. Ash turned to see Gladion leaning against the wall in the shadows, his arms crossed. Silvally stood silently beside him, its strange, composite body absorbing the moonlight. I know, Ash said. You think a clever turn of phrase and a new tax will keep them in line? Gladion scoffed, stepping into the light. His expression was intense, critical. You humiliated them. People like that don't forget. They won't challenge you with Pokémon. They'll use poison, assassins, sabotage. They'll try to turn the people against you with manufactured shortages and lies. What would you have done? Ash challenged. Let them walk all over me. Let them run Alola into the ground for their own profit. I would have found their secrets, Gladion said, his voice dropping to a cold, ruthless whisper. The corruption, the betrayals, the skeletons in their closets. And I would have used that to control them. To ensure their loyalty through fear. That's how you handle snakes. They stared at each other, a fundamental divide in their philosophies hanging in the air between them. Ash, the believer in trust and inspiration. Gladion, the pragmatist who understood the necessity of darkness. That's not me, Ash said finally. I know, Gladion retorted. And that's why playing king is going to get you killed. He turned to leave, then paused. Be careful, Ash. You won a battle today. Don't lose the war. He and Silvally melted back into the shadows and were gone. Ash was left alone with the unsettling warning, the weight of his new crown feeling heavier than ever. Far beyond Alola, in the silent, star-strewn void of ultra-space, an ultra-recon squad vessel, the Stargazer, drifted near a shimmering distortion. Inside, the white-clad figures of Dulce and Zossi monitored their consoles. The energy signature is definitely originating from within the Alolan dimension, Dulce said, his voice flat and analytical. But it's causing a reciprocal decay in the fabric of ultra-space itself. It's like a localized void. It feels cold, Zossi added, her usually cheerful face tight with worry. She pointed to a sensor reading. And it's getting stronger. Look. On the main view screen, the distortion wavered. A figure emerged. It looked human, a man dressed in a stark white and black uniform that seemed to absorb the light around him. He stood in the vacuum of space as if it were solid ground. Unidentified vessel, the man's voice echoed directly in their minds, calm and unervingly serene. You are observing a holy work. This is your only warning to depart. Identify yourself. Dulce commanded, his hands flying over the controls, activating the ship's defensive systems. The man smiled, a gentle, pitying expression. I am Silas. A herald. Behind him, a Pokémon materialized. It was a Metagross, but its silver chassis was dull, matte gray. Its eyes, normally burning with psychic intelligence, were vacant, black pits. It radiated nothing. No life, no energy, no thought. It was a hollow shell. What have you done to that Pokémon? Zossie whispered, horrified. I have granted it peace, Silas said. The peace of the silent eclipse. A mercy that will soon be extended to all the noisy, chaotic light of existence. He raised a hand. But you will not live to see it. The hollow Metagross moved. It didn't use an attack. It simply extended a claw. The Stargazer's shields, capable of withstanding asteroid impacts, flickered and died. The hull groaned, metal screaming as it was torn open. Alarms blared. Zossie, in a panic, activated the emergency comms, broadcasting on all frequencies. Mayday! Mayday! This is Recon Squad Zossie. We are under attack near Sector 7G. The energy source, it's a person. His Pokémon, it's not alive, the light is gone. He walks in, the transmission cut out into a burst of static. On the view screen, the Stargazer was pulled apart, piece by piece, into the void. Silas watched, his placid smile never wavering, before he and his hollow Metagross turned and faded back into the distortion, leaving nothing behind but silence and the faint, cold echo of a dying star. Chapter 3, The Blight on Ulaula. The first reports came from Ulaula Island. They were fractured, confusing, and steeped in a rising tide of local superstition. Fishermen spoke of listless, aggressive Pokémon in the waters off the southern coast, their scales dull, their eyes vacant. Farmers inland found patches of their vibrant berry fields turned to gray, brittle dust overnight, the soil beneath as sterile as ash. People living near the deep jungle complained of a creeping malaise, a profound weariness that leached the color from their days and filled their nights with a quiet, formless dread. Ash stood before the holographic map in the Ether Paradise Command Center, his brow furrowed. The affected area was spreading, a slow, creeping stain originating from the wild, untamed heart of the island. Lily stood beside him, cross-referencing the reports on her datapad with geological surveys and ancient folklore texts. The decay is accelerating, she said, her voice tight with worry. She highlighted a new cluster of reports. It's following the island's ley lines, the natural channels of terrestrial energy. This isn't a natural phenomenon, Ash. It's like a poison, and it's attacking the very life force of the island. It's the king's fault. The voice was sharp, accusatory. They turned to see Kiawe, his arms crossed, his face a mask of frustration. He had just returned from a scouting mission on Ulaula with his new ranger recruits. The locals are panicking, Kiawe continued, his voice tight with anger. Especially the traditionalists in Tapu village. They're saying this blight appeared only after an outsider was crowned. That the land itself is rejecting you. There's a firebrand speaker, a man named Iona, whipping them into a frenzy. That's ridiculous, Mallow chimed in from across the room, where she was organizing medical supplies. Ash saved Alola. Tell that to them, Kiawe shot back. Their world is dying around them, and the only thing that's changed is him. He gestured toward Ash. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unfair, but born of a genuine fear for his home island. The doors to the command center slid open and Nanu sauntered in, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand. His bored expression was firmly back in place, but his eyes were sharp. Having trouble in paradise, Your Majesty, he drawled. He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. This is your problem now. Ulaula is my island, and my people are scared. Scared people are stupid and dangerous. This Iona fellow is gaining traction. If you can't fix this, they'll stop listening to me, and they'll start listening to him. And that, he took another grimacing sip, would be very annoying. It was Nanu's cynical way of asking for help. He was goading Ash into action because he knew, better than anyone, that this was beyond the scope of a normal kahuna's duties. Ash ignored the jibe. He looked at the map, at the spreading stain of gray decay. This isn't a political problem. I can't fix it with a decree. He looked at Kiawe, then at Nanu. It's a sickness. I need to see it for myself. It's too dangerous, Lily protested immediately. The reports say the air itself makes people ill. We'll take precautions, Ash said, his decision made. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a king who ruled from a throne. He was a trainer. A protector. He had to be on the ground. Lily, I need you here. Coordinate the relief efforts. Send supplies to the unaffected villages. Set up a quarantine. Keep people away from the blighted zone. He then turned to Kiawe. Get your rangers to help Lily. We need to contain the panic as much as the blight. Kiawe looked like he was about to argue, to insist on coming, but he saw the look in Ash's eyes. It was the same look he'd had in the stadium, the quiet, unshakable resolve of a leader. He nodded curtly. Understood. I'm coming with you, a cold voice stated. Glad Ion emerged from the shadows of the corridor, where he had evidently been listening. My network has been tracking this. The energy signature is similar to the anomaly from the recon squad's distress call. This is not some local curse. This is the enemy's first move. Ash nodded. All right. Let's go. I'll have my boat take you to the coast, Nanu sighed, finishing his coffee. But I'm not setting foot in that gray wasteland. I have a cat to feed. He turned and shuffled out, his duty as a messenger fulfilled. The air on Ulaula's southern coast was thick and unnaturally still. The vibrant greens of the jungle canopy at the edge of the beach were muted, tinged with a sickly, washed-out gray. The sand under their boots felt cold and brittle, and the cheerful chirping of wind gull was replaced by an oppressive silence. Ash, Glad Ion, and Pikachu stepped off Nanu's police boat onto the shore. Glad Ion immediately pulled out a scanner, its screen flickering with erratic readings. The ambient energy levels are chaotic, Glad Ion muttered, his eyes narrowed. It's like static, drowning out the natural life force of the area. I can feel it, Ash said, his hand resting on Pikachu's head. His partner's fur was standing on end, his ears flattened against his head. It felt like standing next to a machine that was draining the world of its color and sound. It was an aura of profound wrongness. They walked inland, following the edge of the blight. On one side was the familiar, lush Alolan jungle. On the other, a dead landscape. Trees stood like gray skeletons, their leaves turned to dust. The very ground was pale and cracked. It was a perfect, unnerving line between life and its absence. Suddenly, a rustle in the dead undergrowth. A pack of Alolan Rattata, their fur patchy and their eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent violet light, scurried out. They didn't act like normal Pokémon. They moved with a jerky, unnatural silence, and they charged without a sound. They're corrupted, Glad Ion said, reaching for a pokeball. Hollow. Don't hurt them. Ash commanded. They're just sick. He stepped in front of Pikachu. Pikachu, Electroweb. Trap them, don't harm them. Pikachu fired a net of crackling energy that enveloped the Rattata. They thrashed silently, their violet eyes flaring, but they were held fast. Ash approached slowly, his hands open. It's okay, he said softly, extending his senses, his aura. He didn't try to push. He just reached. He felt their pain, their confusion, a cold, empty feeling where their natural spirit should be. It was like a void had been carved inside them. He focused, pushing a tiny, warm sliver of his own energy towards them. For a moment, one of the Rattata stopped thrashing. Its violet eyes flickered, and a hint of its normal, fearful intelligence returned. Then, with a pained squeak, the violet light flared brighter, and it resumed its silent struggle, the connection severed. "It's fighting back," Ash said, pulling his aura back. "The corruption. It's like a parasite." Gladion lowered his hand from his pokeball, watching Ash with a critical, analytical gaze. "Your empathy is a liability. It makes you hesitate." "It helps me understand," Ash countered, his eyes still on the trapped Pokémon. "This isn't something we can just blast our way through. We need to find the source." He stood up, his gaze turning towards the center of the island, towards the foreboding silhouette of Mount Lanakila. "The blight is strongest in that direction." They continued their trek, leaving the trapped Rattata behind. The further they went, the more absolute the decay became. The silence was the worst part. There were no bird calls, no insect hums, just the crunch of dead leaves under their boots. It was a world with the volume turned off. They found more of the hollow Pokémon. A Beware, standing motionless, its arms limp, its normally blank face utterly vacant. A group of Passimian, huddled together, not fighting or playing, but simply staring into nothingness. Ash could feel the cold void in all of them. It was a plague of the soul. According to Lily's maps, the ley lines converge up ahead, Gladion said, checking his scanner again. "There's a place called the Vast Pony Canyon on the other side of the mountain, but Ulaula has a similar, smaller formation. An ancient grotto, sacred to the dragon types of the island." "A totem's lair," Ash breathed, understanding dawning. The totem Pokémon were anchors of natural energy. If you wanted to poison an island, you would start with its heart. They broke through a final line of skeletal trees and entered a wide clearing. In the center was a deep, sunken grotto, a natural amphitheater of rock. And in the center of that grotto was the source of the blight. The totem Kamou, a Pokémon that should have been a magnificent creature of gold and gray scales, was a horrifying sight. It was larger than any Kamou Ash had ever seen, its body swollen and twisted. Its normally proud, jingling scales were a dull, corroded bronze, and they shed a fine, gray dust with every pained movement. Its eyes burned with the same malevolent violet light, and tendrils of the shadowy energy coiled around its body like parasitic vines, pulsing in time with its ragged breaths. The ground around it was utterly dead, a circle of black, sterile earth. The Kamou wasn't just sick, it was a nexus, a living font of the corruption, broadcasting the silent plague across the island. It sensed their presence and let out a roar, but the sound was distorted, a grating shriek of metal and agony that hurt the ears. It slammed its tail against the grotto wall, and the entire clearing shook. "The corruption has amplified its power but shattered its mind," Gladion assessed, his hand already on Silvely's pokeball. "There's nothing left of the original Pokémon. We have to put it down. Now. Before it brings the whole island to ruin." "No," the voice came from behind them. They spun around to see a group of about 20 people emerging from the dead woods. They were dressed in traditional Ululan garb, their faces painted with grim symbols. Their leader was a tall man with a severe face and eyes that burned with zealous fire. "Iona. The Outsider King and his shadow have come," Iona declared, his voice ringing with contempt. He pointed a ceremonial spear at Ash. "You see now the price of your blasphemy. The sacred guardian of Ulaula has been driven mad by the land's rejection of you." "That's not what's happening." Ash shot back. "It's been corrupted by a dark energy. It's in pain. We have to help it." "Help it?" Iona laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "That is no longer a guardian. It is a monster. A monster you created. It is suffering, and the only mercy for it is a swift end." His followers murmured in agreement, raising their own spears and crude weapons. "We have come to perform the rite of cleansing. To grant it peace and appease the angered land." "You'll do no such thing," Gladion said, stepping forward, his expression turning dangerously cold. He released Silvally, the imposing chimera-like Pokémon appearing with a low growl, its eyes locking onto the corrupted Kamo. This totem is a strategic asset, even corrupted. We will contain it, study it. Your superstitious rites will only interfere. A tense standoff ensued. On one side, Gladion, ready to treat the totem like a hostile specimen to be neutralized. On the other, Iona and his zealous followers, determined to kill it as a sacrifice. And in the middle was Ash, who saw neither a specimen nor a sacrifice, but a Pokémon in agony. The corrupted Kamo roared again, its pain and rage boiling over. It unleashed a clanging scales attack, but the sonic waves were distorted, warped into a wave of pure, silent energy that washed over the clearing. The remaining color in the nearby trees faded to gray, and the humans all stumbled, a wave of profound despair and weakness washing over them. This ends now. Iona yelled, shaking off the effect. For Ula. He and his followers charged towards the grotto. Fools! Gladion snarled. Silvally, multi-attack. Silvally prepared to intercept them. Stop! Ash's voice boomed with an authority that stunned everyone into silence, even the rampaging Kamo. He held out his arms, positioning himself between both groups and the totem. Both of you are wrong. Killing it won't solve anything. The blight will remain. And we can't just treat it like an experiment. He turned to face the monster in the grotto, his expression softening. He recalled the feeling he'd had with the trapped Rattata, the small flicker of connection. He had to try. Pikachu, stay with Gladion, he commanded. Don't let anyone interfere. Pika. Pikachu protested, his cheeks sparking with worry. Trust me, Ash said, giving his partner one last, reassuring look. He turned and began to walk, alone, down into the grotto. Ash, no. Gladion yelled. Its energy will tear you apart. Iona and his followers just watched, stunned into inaction by the sheer audacity of the act. Ash walked slowly, his hands open and visible. The air in the grotto was thick with the silent corruption, so heavy it felt like walking through water. Every step sent a wave of cold despair through him, urging him to turn back, to give up. He fought it, focusing on the memory of Lily's smile, of his Pokémon's trust, of the sun on his face at the Pokémon school. The Kamo watched him approach, its violet eyes burning. It let out a low, guttural growl, a warning. Ash didn't stop. He was 20 feet away now. 10. With a final, agonized shriek, the totem lunged, its massive, clawed hands swiping at him. Ash didn't dodge. He stood his ground, raised his arms, and braced for the impact. The claw struck him, not with physical force, but with a tidal wave of pure, corrupting energy. Pain, unlike anything he had ever felt, exploded in his mind. It wasn't physical pain, but the pain of utter despair, of loneliness, of a universe devoid of light and warmth. He saw terrifying visions, a fractured, crystalline entity, a being of living shadow and broken light, adrift in an endless, silent void. It whispered of a perfect, beautiful peace, the peace of nothingness. He saw a man in a white and black uniform, kneeling before this fallen god, his face serene. Silas. The herald. Join us, the whispers urged. End the chaos. Embrace the silence. Ash's knees buckled. His vision swam. The cold was absolute. He was drowning in it. But in the depths of that cold, he felt something else. A flicker. Not of his own strength, but of the totem's. Beneath the layers of rage and corruption, he felt the original spirit of the Kamo, trapped, terrified, and fighting to get out. It wasn't a monster. It was a prisoner in its own body. He grit his teeth, blood trickling from his lip. No, he gasped, forcing the word out. You don't get to have him. He looked up, his own eyes blazing with a defiant light. He shoved the visions away, fighting back against the despair with the sheer, stubborn force of his own spirit. He placed his hand on the Kamo's claw, where it was still pressed against him. His new Zering, the crown of light, began to glow. It wasn't the explosive light of a battle move. It was a soft, gentle, golden radiance, the light of dawn. "I'm not here to fight you," Ash said, his voice gaining strength. "I'm here to help." He closed his eyes and poured. He didn't pour power. He poured his memories. The joy of hatching Rowlet. The pride of seeing Lycanroc evolve. The fierce loyalty of Incineroar. The goofy antics of Meltan. The unbreakable bond with Pikachu. He poured in the warmth of the Alolan sun, the taste of a pinnap berry, the sound of Lily's laughter. He poured his own light, his own life, his own aura, into the corrupted Pokémon, not as an attack, but as an offering. The violet energy recoiled from the golden light as if burned. The Kamo shrieked, a sound of both agony and confusion, and tried to pull its claw back. But Ash held on, his grip like iron. "You are a guardian of this island," he yelled, his voice resonating with the power of his Zering. "Remember who you are." The golden light flared, flowing from Ash, through the Zering, and into the totem. It was a torrent of pure, restorative energy. The tendrils of dark, silent energy clinging to the Kamo hissed and evaporated like smoke. The malevolent violet in its eyes flickered, warring with the encroaching gold. The strain on Ash was immense. He felt like his own life force was being drained away, fed into a bottomless pit. His vision turned gray, the world fading at the edges. He was going to pass out. He wasn't strong enough. Then, he felt a new strength flow into him. He looked up. On the rim of the grotto, Gladion stood, one hand outstretched, his own latent aura, raw and undisciplined, reaching out to help. Across from him, Pikachu's cheeks were sparking, not with battlelust, but with a desperate desire to share his energy with his partner. Even Iona and his followers were staring, their anger forgotten, replaced by a raw, primal awe. Their collective focus, their hope, was a trickle of power that fed Ash's own. He was the king of Alola. And Alola was with him. With a final, desperate roar, Ash unleashed all of it. A wave of pure, concentrated light, the very essence of Ohana, washed over the totem Kamo. The shriek of the totem changed. The rage and pain lessened, replaced by a note of pure, cathartic release. The last of the violet energy was violently expelled from its body, dissipating into nothingness. The swollen, twisted parts of its body shrank back to their normal size. The dull, corroded bronze of its scales flaked away, revealing the magnificent, shimmering gold and gray beneath. The light in its eyes faded, replaced by the weary but noble intelligence of a true totem. The silence of the blight was broken by the gentle, melodic chiming of its scales. The totem Kamo looked at its own claws, then at Ash, who was swaying on his feet, his energy utterly spent. It took a step back, lowered its head, and let out a soft, respectful rumble. A sound of gratitude. As if a switch had been flipped, life began to return to the grotto. A faint green tinge appeared on the dead ground. A single, small flower, a vibrant yellow lima, pushed its way through the cracked earth at the base of the totem's foot. The blight was broken at its source. Ash watched it bloom, a weary smile touching his lips, before his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Gladion was at his side in an instant, checking his pulse. "He's alive. Just completely drained." He looked up from Ash's pale face to the healed totem, then to the stunned faces of Iona and his followers. His usual cynical expression was gone, replaced by something complex and unreadable. He had been ready to dissect a monster. Ash had healed a guardian. Iona slowly lowered his spear. He walked to the edge of the grotto and looked down at the unconscious boy, then at the now docile totem. He saw the flower blooming in the dead soil. He had come seeking a sacrifice to appease a vengeful land. Instead, he had witnessed an act of selfless healing that had brought the land back to life. He turned to his followers, his face filled with a dawning, profound shame. He then turned back towards Gladion, who was carefully lifting Ash into his arms. "The kahuna of Ula, Iona began, his voice raspy with emotion, "he will have my full report." He knelt, a gesture of deep, newfound respect. "And we will stand guard over our totem. And await the king's recovery." Gladion just nodded, his gaze distant. He looked at Ash's unconscious form, then back at the distant, unseen enemy they now faced. Ash's empathy, the trait he had called a liability, had just achieved what his own ruthless pragmatism never could. It hadn't just won a battle. It had won the heart of the island itself. And in the face of the silent, soulless enemy they were up against, Gladion was beginning to understand that a king's compassion might just be the most powerful weapon they had. Chapter 4, The King and the Shadow. The week following the cleansing of Ula was a strange kind of calm. The blight receded as quickly as it had appeared, the vibrant greens and floral explosions of Alola reclaiming the grey, dead land with a startling, life-affirming ferocity. The stories of Ash's selfless act spread like wildfire, carried by Iona's repentant followers and confirmed by a grudging, one-word statement from Nanu, "Solved." The people of Alola, who had cheered for his strength in the stadium, now whispered his name with a different kind of reverence. He wasn't just a champion who fought for them, he was a king who would bleed for them. This new wave of public adoration made Gladion deeply uncomfortable. He watched from the periphery as Ash, now recovered, threw himself into his new duties. He didn't sit in the conference hall issuing edicts. He was on the ground, helping Kiawe's fledgling rangers clear debris from the blighted zones, working alongside Mallow to distribute food and medical supplies, and personally overseeing the construction of new, reinforced Pokémon shelters. He moved with a boundless, infectious energy, his charisma a magnetic force that drew people in and inspired them to work harder. He was building a kingdom not on laws and fear, but on goodwill and shared purpose. To Gladion, it was all a house of cards. A fragile piece built on a foundation of sentimentality, waiting for the first real gust of wind to blow it all down. He found Ash late one evening on the training grounds of Ether Paradise. The sun had bled below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Ash was alone with Pikachu, not training, but simply sitting on the grass, watching the sky. The weight of the past few weeks was visible in the slump of his shoulders, a quiet exhaustion that his public energy couldn't entirely hide. "You're celebrating too early," Gladion said, his voice cutting through the evening quiet. He didn't bother with greetings. Silvally materialized at his side, its presence a silent, imposing echo of its master's mood. Ash didn't seem surprised. He just patted the grass beside him. "Sit. The sky's pretty great tonight." Gladion remained standing, his arms crossed. "The Herald, Silas. My network has found traces of him. He didn't just create that blight. He was testing you. Probing your defenses. He saw how you reacted. He knows you lead with your heart." "Good," Ash said simply, his eyes still on the sky. "Let him. You think your empathy is a weapon?" Gladion scoffed, his voice sharp with frustration. "It's a target. He'll use it. He'll put you in an impossible position. He'll force you to choose between saving one person you love and 1,000 you don't. He'll create a disaster so big your hope can't fix it. And when you hesitate, when you try to save everyone and save no one, that's when he'll strike." Ash finally turned to look at him, his expression serious. "And what's your solution, Gladion? Let the person I love die to save the 1,000? Make the cold, logical choice." "Yes," Gladion said without hesitation, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Because that's what a real leader does. They make the sacrifices no one else is willing to make. They carry the sins so their people can sleep at night. You're trying to be a hero. Alola doesn't need a hero right now. It needs a king who understands that sometimes, to save the kingdom, you have to let part of it burn. The air crackled with the weight of their opposing philosophies. This was the argument that had been brewing between them since the day of Ash's coronation, now laid bare under the twilight sky. "I won't become that," Ash said, his voice quiet but firm as steel. "I can't. If that's what it takes to be a king, then the Tapus chose the wrong person." "They did," Gladion agreed bluntly. "They chose a boy who wins battles. I'm not interested in winning battles. I'm interested in winning the war." He took a step forward, his gaze hardening into an open challenge. "This isn't working, Ash. You, playing the benevolent king on the front lines, me, skulking in the shadows cleaning up your messes. We're pulling in two different directions. Alola needs a singular, unified defense. A clear chain of command." Ash stood up, his posture shifting. The friendly, tired boy was gone, replaced by the champion. "What are you proposing?" "A duel," Gladion said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. "Not for your title. You can keep the crown, the adoring crowds, the political headaches. I don't want them. This is for the right to be Alola's protector. A full 6-on-6 battle. No Z moves. No tricks. Just strategy and strength. The two of us, at our best." His eyes gleamed with a cold, competitive fire. "If I win, I take command of Alola's defenses. All of them. The Rangers, the Ether Foundation's security, everything. You will become the face of Alola, the figurehead. You will inspire the people, and I will do the dirty work necessary to keep them safe. You will be the light, and I will be the shadow that holds the monsters at bay." Pikachu leaped from the grass onto Ash's shoulder, a low growl rumbling in his chest. This was more than a rivalry. It was a schism. "And if I win?" Ash asked, his voice dangerously calm. "If you win," Gladion said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, "you prove me wrong. You prove that your way, the way of hope and trust, is strong enough. And I will serve you. Not as a rival, not as a critic in the shadows, but as your blade. I will lead your intelligence network, your covert operations. I will be the weapon you point at our enemies, and I will not question your command. You will have my loyalty, completely and absolutely." It was an audacious, arrogant proposal, but it was also born of a genuine, desperate fear for Alola's future. Gladion truly believed Ash's way was a path to ruin, and he was willing to put everything on the line to prove it. Ash looked at Gladion, at the fierce conviction in his eyes, and he understood. This wasn't about ego. It was about love. A twisted, painful love for his sister, for his home, that manifested as ruthless pragmatism. The only way to earn Gladion's trust, to truly unify their strengths, was to meet him on the one field he respected above all others. "Mount Lanakila," Ash said, his voice ringing with finality. "The summit. Dawn. Just us." Gladion nodded curtly. "Dawn." He turned and walked away, silverly vanishing with him into the growing darkness, leaving Ash alone with the weight of the coming battle. This fight wouldn't be for a trophy or a title. It would be for the very soul of his reign. The summit of Mount Lanakila was a throne room of ice and stone. The air was thin and bitingly cold, the rising sun casting long, sharp shadows across the pristine snow. The peak where Ash had become champion was now the arena for the most important battle of his life. There were no crowds, no judges. Just him and Gladion, standing 50 paces apart, the wind whipping at their jackets. Lily was there. She had insisted. She stood off to the side, near the stone champion's chair, her expression a mask of profound anxiety. She loved them both, her brother and the man she was falling for, and now they stood as adversaries, ready to tear each other apart to decide the fate of her home. 6-on-6, Gladion called out, his voice sharp in the thin air. Standard battle rules. Let's begin. You got it, Ash replied, a strange calm settling over him. This was familiar territory. The chaos of kingship faded away, leaving only the pure, focused clarity of a Pokémon battle. Lycanroc, I choose you. His dusk form Lycanroc emerged with a sharp bark, its orange fur a stark splash of color against the white snow. Its green eyes were locked on Gladion, burning with intensity. Gladion smirked, a flash of his old rivalry showing through. A fitting start. Zoroark, let's go. The Pokémon that appeared, however, wasn't Zoroark. It was Gladion's own Lycanroc, the midnight form, its red fur and slouched posture a dark mirror to Ash's. It snarled, its eyes glowing with feral energy. An illusion? Ash muttered. Let's find out, Gladion taunted. Lycanroc, Stone Edge. The dark Lycanroc slammed its claws into the ground, and pillars of sharp rock erupted towards Ash's Pokémon. Dodge and use Accelerock. Ash commanded. His Lycanroc moved like a blur, weaving through the stone pillars and slamming into its doppelganger. The impact was solid, real. The dark Lycanroc staggered back, shaking its head. It wasn't an illusion. It was a real Lycanroc. So you're leading with your own, Ash said, a hint of respect in his voice. I know your playbook, Ash, Gladion called back. You favor speed and aggression. I'm here to counter it. The two rock wolves clashed in a flurry of claws and fangs, a whirlwind of red and orange against the snow. They were evenly matched in speed and power, but Gladion's strategy was immediately apparent. His Lycanroc fought defensively, using counter whenever Ash's overextended, turning his own aggression against him. It was a frustrating, grinding battle, but Ash was patient. He waited for his opening. He's waiting for you to get reckless, Ash told his Lycanroc through their bond. Don't give him the satisfaction. Wear him down. Lycanroc changed tactics, switching from powerful single strikes to a rapid series of bites, targeting its opponent's legs, forcing it to stay mobile, denying it the chance to set up a solid counter. The tide began to turn. Seeing his advantage slip, Gladion switched gears. Enough. Use Outrage. His Lycanroc's eyes glowed red as it succumbed to a berserker fury, charging with reckless abandon. Now. Ash yelled. Accelerock, under its guard. As the rampaging Lycanroc lunged, Ash's Lycanroc dropped low and shot forward, a streak of orange lightning. It didn't aim for the body. It slammed into its opponent's knee, buckling the leg and sending the larger Pokémon tumbling into the snow, its outrage broken. Stone Edge. Full power. Ash commanded. Pillars of rock erupted from the ground, striking the fallen Lycanroc and knocking it out. The first round went to Ash. Gladion recalled his Pokémon without a word, his expression unreadable. A predictable opening. Now, the real battle begins. He threw his next Pokeball. Weevil, stand by. The swift ice/dark type appeared, its claws gleaming. The type advantage was clear. You fought well, Lycanroc, Ash said, recalling his tired Pokémon. He needed to handle this speed demon carefully. Meltan, no, Melmetal, I choose you. The colossal form of the fully evolved mythical Pokémon materialized, its heavy metal body thudding onto the snowy ground. The tiny, playful Meltan he'd used against Nanu had, with the help of its brethren at Kukui's lab, merged into this formidable powerhouse. Gladion's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected this. A new evolution, he noted. Impressive. But size isn't everything. Weevil, Ice Shard. Weevil shot forward, firing a volley of sharp, glittering ice fragments. They pinged harmlessly off Melmetal's body. My turn, Ash said with a grin. Double Iron Bash. Melmetal's massive arms spun like turbines, and it charged. Weevil was fast, but the sheer area Melmetal covered was immense. It dodged the first swing, but the second caught it, a glancing blow that sent it flying into a snowdrift. Don't let it get up. Flash cannon. Ash pressed. Melmetal fired a huge beam of steel energy, blasting the snowdrift and forcing a battered Weevil back out into the open. Night slash. Gladion commanded, trying to get in close. Weevil became a blur, its claws glowing with dark energy, but trying to get close to a spinning Melmetal was suicide. It was forced to keep its distance, its primary strength nullified. Gladion was being systematically dismantled. Seeing no other option, he recalled his Weevil. You control the field well, he admitted, a grudging respect in his tone. But you can't control the sky. He threw a pokeball high into the air. Crobat, go. The four-winged poison/flying type appeared with a piercing screech. Melmetal is too slow to hit it, Lily murmured nervously, hugging herself against the cold. This is a bad matchup. Crobat, air slash. Gladion ordered. Crobat unleashed a series of sharp, cutting blades of wind. They struck Melmetal, and while they did little damage, they were relentless, forcing the big Pokémon to shield its single eye. Now, cross poison. Crobat dove, its wings glowing with a toxic purple, aiming for the back of Melmetal's head. Got you, Ash whispered. Thunderbolt. A massive bolt of electricity erupted from the hexagonal nut in Melmetal's chest, shooting straight up and blasting the diving Crobat out of the sky. The super-effective move was devastating. Crobat crashed to the ground, twitching and paralyzed. How? Gladion demanded, stunned. We've been practicing, Ash said with a shrug. Melmetal's a big target, so we worked on area denial. A quick flash cannon finished the paralyzed Crobat. Two of Gladion's Pokémon were down, and he had barely scratched one of Ash's. The battle was turning into a rout. Gladion's face was a storm cloud of frustration and disbelief. His cold, calculated counters were being broken by Ash's unpredictable adaptability and the sheer, surprising power of his team. You're still just relying on brute force and type advantages. Gladion snarled, his composure fraying. Battles are more than that. Zoroark, let's go. This time, the real Zoroark appeared, its crimson mane whipping in the wind. Melmetal, return. Ash recalled his powerhouse. He knew what was coming. He needed a counter to Zoroark's illusions. He needed a Pokémon that fought with more than just its eyes. Incineroar, stand by. The fiery wrestler emerged, letting out a challenging roar that sent plumes of steam into the cold air. Night days. Gladion commanded instantly. Zoroark unleashed a wave of dark energy. When it cleared, there were 5 Zoroarks on the field, all of them moving, all of them identical. A classic illusion, Ash said. Incineroar, close your eyes. Incineroar grunted, but obeyed, sinking into a low fighting stance, its eyes shut tight. What are you doing? Gladion asked, confused. We don't need to see you to fight you, Ash said. Flamethrower, spin. Incineroar unleashed a torrent of fire, not at any one target, but in a wide circle around itself, a defensive wall of flame. The illusory Zoroarks flickered and vanished as the flames passed through them, leaving only the real one, which leaped back to avoid being burned. The trick was broken in seconds. Impossible. Gladion grit his teeth. It should have smelled them all equally. Zoroark's illusions trick your mind, not your nose, Ash explained. But the real one has a scent. Incineroar just had to ignore what his eyes were telling him and trust his other senses. It was a brilliant, simple solution to a complex problem, a strategy born of a deep understanding of his Pokémon. Lily watched, a slow, proud smile spreading across her face. This was the Ash she knew, the one who saw connections no one else did. The real Zoroark, now exposed, was at a disadvantage. It was a trickster, not a brawler. It traded a few blows with Incineroar, a frantic night slash against a powerful Darkest Lariat, but the difference in raw power was too great. A final, thunderous throat chop sent Zoroark to the ground, defeated. 3-0. Gladion was breathing heavily, his face pale. He was being systematically outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought. His entire philosophy was crumbling before his eyes. "It's not over," he growled, recalling Zoroark. He looked at his 3 remaining Pokeballs, then at Ash, new, dangerous light in his eyes. No more strategy. No more counters. Just power. He threw his 4th Pokeball. "My own Lycanroc. Get back in there." His midnight form Lycanroc, which had been resting, reappeared on the field. It was bruised and tired, but still ready to fight. "And my Weevil." He sent out the Ice-type again. It too was battered, but its claws were sharp. And now. Silvally. He threw his last Pokeball. His ultimate partner, the synthetic beast created to fight Ultra Beasts, emerged with a cry that was part beast, part machine. It stood beside the other 2, a united front of desperation. 3 against 1. Ash asked, raising an eyebrow as he recalled the tired Incineroar. "The rules are broken," Gladion declared, his voice ragged. "This isn't about a fair fight anymore. This is about survival. Your Pokémon are tired. You have 3 left. I'm ending this now." It was a shocking, blatant breach of the rules they had set. But Ash didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "If that's how it has to be," he said sadly. He looked at his remaining Pokémon. "Charizard, Naganadel, Pikachu. All of you. Let's go." His own final 3 emerged, standing together. The fiery dragon, the alien Ultra Beast, and the small electric mouse. They faced down Gladion's desperate trio across the snowy peak. The friendly duel had devolved into a chaotic, all-out brawl. What followed was not a battle. It was a storm. 6 of the most powerful Pokémon in Alola clashed at once, their attacks tearing up the summit. Charizard's flamethrower met Silvally's tri-attack in a huge explosion. Naganadel's Dragon Pulse clashed with Lycanroc's Stone Edge. Pikachu's Thunderbolt raced to intercept Weevil's Ice Shard. It was chaos, but Ash was a master of chaos. He wasn't just issuing individual commands. He was conducting an orchestra of destruction. "Charizard, seismic toss on Lycanroc," he yelled. Charizard swooped down, grabbing the already weakened Rockwolf and flying high into the air. Naganadel, X-Scissor on Weevil. "Pikachu, cover it with Electroweb." Naganadel and Pikachu moved as one, the toxic blades and the electric net combining to trap and overwhelm the speedy Weevil. Gladion was trying to command his own team, but his orders were frantic, disjointed. He was reacting, not commanding. Silvally, use Air Slash to free Lycanroc. But it was too late. Charizard was already diving, spinning Lycanroc down into the hard-packed ice with a sickening crunch. It was out for good. A moment later, Naganadel and Pikachu's combined assault overwhelmed Weevil, knocking it out of the fight. In a matter of seconds, Gladion's desperate 3-on-3 gambit had been reduced to a 1-on-3, with only Silvally left standing. The synthetic Pokémon stood alone, surrounded, its master staring in disbelief. It let out a defiant cry and its body began to glow. "Memory drive, activate." Gladion roared, inserting a dark-colored memory disk into Silvally's head. "Dark memory. Now, multi-attack." Silvally's form shimmered, taking on a dark aura as it charged, aiming for Pikachu. "I don't think so," Ash said calmly. Charizard, Dragon Claw. Naganadel, Sludge Bomb. Pikachu, Iron Tail. The 3 attacks hit Silvally from 3 different directions at the exact same moment. The force of the combined assault was immense. Silvally, for all its power, was thrown backward, its dark-type transformation wavering. It crashed at Gladion's feet, struggling to rise, but its energy was spent. It slumped to the snow, defeated. The battle was over. Ash had won. Decisively. Silence descended on the summit, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind. Gladion stared at his defeated Pokémon, then at Ash, who stood with his partners, not in triumph, but with a look of profound sorrow. Why? Gladion whispered, his voice cracking. How? My strategies were perfect. My counters were flawless. I should have won. You were battling my Pokémon, Ash said, walking forward, his team parting to let him pass. You should have been battling me. He stopped in front of Gladion. You see Pokémon as tools. Pieces on a chessboard. You learn their types, their moves, their stats, and you try to counter them. But that's not how it works. They're not pieces. They're partners. They have good days and bad days. They get scared. They get brave. They surprise you. He gestured back to his own team. I won because I trust them. I trusted Incineroar to use his senses, not just his eyes. I trusted Melmetal's defense over Weevil's speed. I trusted that Charizard, Naganadel, and Pikachu could fight together, as a team, not just as three powerful individuals. You don't win by making the perfect move. You win by believing in your partners, and giving them the freedom to be more than just their type or their stats. Gladion looked down at the snow, the fight completely gone from him. He had built his entire identity, his entire philosophy, on the idea of cold, hard logic. And that logic had just been shattered by something he couldn't quantify, Ash's bond with his Pokémon. He sank to his knees, recalling his defeated team one by one. I lost, he breathed. It sounded less like an admission and more like a revelation. Ash knelt in front of him. No, he said gently. We didn't. He offered a hand to his rival. You said if I won, you would be my blade. But I don't want a blade, Gladion. I don't want a weapon I can point. I want a partner. I want a friend. He looked Gladion in the eye, his gaze full of an earnest, unwavering sincerity. Your way is not my way. But you were right about one thing. Alola needs someone who can walk in the darkness. Someone who can make the hard choices. I can't be that person. But you can. He tightened his grip on Gladion's hand. Don't be my shadow, Gladion. Be my shield. Lead the new intelligence network. Find Silas. Uncover his plans. Do the things I can't do. Not as my subordinate, but as my equal. My other half. The king's shadow. It was an offer of immense trust. He wasn't taking command away from Gladion, he was redefining it. He was validating Gladion's purpose, but framing it within his own philosophy of partnership. Tears welled in Gladion's eyes, a rare and shocking sight. They weren't tears of defeat, but of a profound, earth-shattering release. The burden of being Alola's sole, ruthless protector, a burden he had placed on himself, was finally being shared. He wasn't alone in the dark anymore. He took Ash's hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. The king's shadow, he repeated, the words tasting strange and new. He looked at Ash, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a naive boy. He saw a true king. He nodded, a single, sharp gesture of acceptance. I accept. Lily ran to them then, her own tears flowing freely, and threw her arms around both of them in a fierce hug. On the frozen peak of Mount Lanakila, under the light of a new day, the rivalry was finally reforged. The king and his shadow were united. And as they stood there, a new, powerful alliance forged in the crucible of battle, none of them saw it. On the console of Gladion's discarded scanner, a single, urgent message was blinking, unnoticed. It was a deep space intercept from an old, forgotten Ether Foundation listening post. A garbled fragment of a message, translated from an ancient, cosmic dialect. It read, the prism. Cracked. The light eater. stirs. It hungers. For the dawn, the true enemy, the ancient force that Silas merely served, was beginning to wake. And it was far older and far more powerful than any of them could possibly imagine. Chapter 5, Siege on Paradise. A month passed. The alliance between Ash and Glad-Ion, forged in the frozen fire of their duel, fundamentally altered the political landscape of Alola. There was a new sense of purpose, a quiet efficiency that settled over the islands. Ash, freed from the constant, grinding worry of internal threats, focused on what he did best, inspiring and uniting the people. The King's Rangers, under the enthusiastic leadership of his friends, became a celebrated institution, their blue and gold uniforms a common and welcome sight from the shores of Mele to the slopes of Ulula. They were a living symbol of the King's promise: no one in Alola, human or Pokemon, would be left behind. Glad-Ion, in turn, vanished. He and his small, hand-picked unit of operatives, mostly former Team Skull grunts who valued loyalty over legality, became phantoms, the whispers of the King's shadow. They operated out of the repurposed Patown, its grim facade now concealing a state-of-the-art intelligence hub. They dismantled the lingering remnants of the old guard's opposition not with force, but with information. A quiet word about an illegal smuggling operation here, a leaked document about tax evasion there. The wealthy, bitter nobles who had sought to undermine Ash found themselves tangled in a web of their own secrets, their power to threaten him evaporating overnight. They didn't know who was targeting them, only that the new king's reign had brought with it an unseen, all-knowing judge. It was a period of fragile, industrious peace. But it was the quiet before the storm. The attack came without warning, on a day that was deceptively perfect. The sky over Ether Paradise was a flawless, painted blue. The sun shone on the shimmering white walls of the facility, and the Pokemon in the conservation area roamed peacefully. Lily was in the main research lab, overseeing a project to synthesize a stable, long-lasting antidote to the Blight's residual effects. Ash was with her, not as a king, but as a friend, helping a nervous Ether employee coax a timid cutiefly into giving a pollen sample. "See? You just have to be patient," Ash said with a warm smile as the tiny Pokemon finally landed on the employee's finger. Lily smiled back at him from across the lab, a look of easy affection in her eyes. In the past month, their bond had deepened into something quiet, comfortable, and unspoken. The chaos of his coronation had forged a partnership, but the peace that followed was allowing something more to grow. Then, the world broke. A sound, like the sky being torn in half, ripped through the air. It wasn't an explosion, it was a dimensional rupture. Every Pokemon in the facility cried out in unison, a chorus of terror and pain. The lights flickered and died, and the emergency klaxons began to blare, their shrill, panicked cry a stark contrast to the day's earlier peace. Ash and Lily rushed to the main observatory window. What they saw stole the breath from their lungs. All around Ether Paradise, the sky was filled with jagged, violet-black portals, spitting out figures into the open air. Dozens of them, all clad in the same stark white and black uniforms as Silas. They weren't falling, they were hovering, held aloft by boots that crackled with anti-gravitational energy. And with them came the hollows. It wasn't just Rattata this time. There were Alolan Golem, their rocky bodies dull and lifeless, their stone shard cannons silent. There were massive, silent Toucanon, their beaks cold and grey. There were sleek, empty-eyed Salazzle, moving with a predator's grace but none of a predator's life. It was an army of the dead, an army of nothingness. "They're here," Ash breathed, his voice grim. Pikachu was already on his shoulder, sparks flying from his cheeks, his body a tense coil of fury. At the head of the invading force, hovering directly before the main window, was Silas. He looked exactly as he had in Ash's vision, serene, calm, his face a mask of placid pity. He raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture of greeting. His voice echoed not through the air, but directly inside their minds, a cold, clear intrusion. "Ash Ketchum, King of the Chaotic Light. I have come for what is mine." The research of the Ether Foundation on dimensional travel is a key component for the Great Eclipse. Surrender it, and I will grant your people a swift, peaceful transition into silence. Resist, and their end will be loud. Lily, Ash said, his voice dropping into the focused calm of a commander. Get to the central control room. Lock down the facility. All of it. Especially the sublevels where your father's research is stored. Activate Protocol Zero Dawn. Protocol Zero Dawn was a doomsday defense she and her mother had designed after the last Ultra Beast crisis, a complete lockdown of the facility's most sensitive labs, sealing them behind layered energy shields and meter-thick titanium blast doors. Lily's face was pale, but her eyes were resolved. She nodded, her fear eclipsed by a surge of fierce determination. What are you going to do? What he expects me to do, Ash said, a grim fire in his eyes. I'm going to fight. He turned to the Ether employees cowering in the lab. Get to the shelters. Now. Go. As people scrambled for safety, Ash and Lily shared one last, fleeting look. It was a look that said everything they hadn't yet found the words for. Be safe. Come back. Then she was gone, running towards the control center, her duty clear. Ash ran the other way, towards the main entrance of the paradise, Pikachu a yellow blur on his shoulder. His Z-ring, the crown of light, was already glowing with a steady, golden light. The siege of Ether Paradise had begun. The main atrium was in chaos. Silas's forces had already breached the outer defenses. A hollow golem smashed through the main doors, scattering staff like pins. Several of Silas's white-clad soldiers, who called themselves heralds, followed it, their weapons not firing bullets, but beams of the same silent, corrupting energy from Alola. Lycanroc, let's go. Ash yelled, throwing his pokeball. Stone Edge. His dusk form Lycanroc appeared, and without hesitation, slammed its paws down. A wall of sharp rock erupted from the polished floor, blocking the herald's advance and giving the Ether staff precious seconds to escape. Pikachu, thunderbolt on that golem. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder and unleashed a massive bolt of lightning. It struck the hollow golem, and the creature shuddered, but it didn't cry out. It didn't show any sign of pain. It just turned its vacant, black eyes towards Pikachu and fired a beam of dark energy from its cannons. Dodge! Ash yelled. Pikachu zipped out of the way just as the beam struck the floor, leaving behind a patch of dead, gray tile that crumbled to dust. This was their primary advantage and their greatest weakness. The Hollows felt no pain. They had no survival instinct. They were perfect, relentless soldiers. Ash engaged the first wave, his Pokémon moving with the fluid, coordinated grace of long practice. He wasn't just fighting, he was directing a defensive ballet. Lycanroc herded heralds into choke points, Incineroar used its powerful build to physically block doorways, and Pikachu acted as a mobile artillery unit, his electric attacks the most effective at disrupting the Hollow's strange energy. Sir, an Ether security chief yelled, running up to Ash. They're bypassing the main levels. Multiple squads are using personal teleportation tech to breach the lower labs directly. They know where they're going. They have a map, Ash realized with a jolt. Silas had an insider, or had extracted the information from someone. That's their real target. The rest of this is just a distraction. He looked at the chaos in the atrium. He couldn't be in two places at once. Then, the shadows in the corner of the atrium seemed to deepen, to coalesce. From them, two figures emerged. Gladion and Silvally. Traffic on the way here was terrible, Gladion said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance. They're splitting their forces. A classic pincer movement. Gladion. Ash felt a surge of relief. They're going for the wormhole tech in the sublevels. I know. My unit is already moving to intercept, Gladion said. His eyes, however, were locked on the main entrance, where more heralds and hollows were pouring in. He drew a long, curved blade from his back, a weapon Ash had never seen him use. It shimmered with a faint, dark energy. Lily. Control room. Locking the place down, Ash replied. A flicker of relief crossed Gladion's face before it was replaced by his usual cold focus. Good. You handle the loud part up here. Be the symbol. Draw their attention. I'll cut the head off the snake. With that, he and Silverly melted back into the shadows, gone as quickly as they had appeared. He was a ghost, a blade in the dark, moving to his own battlefield. Ash trusted him completely. Ash turned his attention back to the fight. Incineroar, flare blitz. Clear a path. Incineroar cloaked itself in fire and charged, a living comet that smashed through a line of heralds, sending them flying. Ash and his team pushed forward, out of the atrium and onto the main exterior bridge of the paradise. The full scale of the invasion was terrifying. The sky was a swarm of white uniforms and dead-eyed Pokémon. At the center of it all, Silas hovered, watching Ash with his serene, infuriating smile. Your resistance is admirable, Silas's voice echoed in his mind. But it is the thrashing of a drowning man. The universe trends toward silence, King Ketchum. You are fighting against the current of existence itself. The universe trends towards life. Ash yelled back, his voice raw. Towards noise and chaos and feeling. You're the one fighting against it. A difference of opinion, Silas replied calmly. He gestured, and a massive, hollow steelix, its body the color of lead, rose from the ocean. Let us discuss it. The battle for Ether Paradise escalated into a full-blown war. Ash was at its epicenter, a whirlwind of motion and command. He recalled his tired Lycanroc and sent out Charizard, the fiery dragon's roar a defiant challenge against the silent army. The battle took to the skies, a chaotic dogfight between Charizard and a squadron of Hollow 2 cannon. Down below, the Ether Foundation's own security forces, bolstered by the arrival of Kiawe and his rangers on their ride Pokémon, were holding the line, fighting desperately to defend their home. Meanwhile, deep in the sublevels, Lily had made it to the central control room. The reinforced chamber was a hive of activity, technicians working frantically at their consoles. Report. Lily commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative, cutting through the panic. She was no longer the timid girl who had been afraid of Pokémon. She was Luzamon's daughter, the acting head of the Ether Foundation, and a queen defending her castle. The main lockdown is holding, ma'am, a technician reported, his fingers flying across a keyboard. But they've bypassed the primary conduits. They're using some kind of phase teleportation to appear directly inside the labs. They've already breached Labs 7 and 9. And Lab 8? Lily asked, her heart pounding. Lab 8 held her father's most dangerous and theoretical work, the dimensional siphon prototype. Sealed. Protocol Zero Dawn is active. But they're trying to brute force the energy shields. The integrity is down to 60% and falling. Lily's mind raced. She couldn't let them get that tech. It was the key to creating a stable, massive wormhole, one big enough to bring the entity Silas served, the corrupted Necrozma, directly to Alola. Rear out all non-essential power to Lab 8's shield emitters, she ordered. And get me a visual. An image appeared on the main screen. A team of heralds was standing before the massive titanium door of Lab 8, their hands pressed against a shimmering golden energy field. Dark, violet energy was pouring from their palms, eating away at the shield, causing it to hiss and spark violently. They'll be through in minutes, the technician said, his voice grim. Lily clenched her fists. She had done all she could from the control room. It was time for a new strategy. Keep the power flowing, she said, her voice steady. I'm going down there. Ma'am, you can't. It's a war zone. Lily turned, her eyes blazing with a cold fire that mirrored her brother's. This is my home. And those are my father's secrets. They will not have them. She turned and strode out of the control room, her path set. In the dark, narrow service corridors, Gladion moved like a wraith. His blade, a relic from his time with Team Skull infused with dark-type energy, hummed softly. He and Silverly dispatched the Herald patrols they encountered with silent, ruthless efficiency. He wasn't battling, he was hunting. He followed the psychic trail of the main invading force, a trail that led him deeper and deeper into the facility. He rounded a corner and found a scene of carnage. Several of his own shadow operatives lay unconscious on the floor, their bodies flickering with a dangerous dark energy. Standing over them was a single, towering figure. A hollow Metagross, its metallic skin pitted and dead, its psychic eyes empty black holes. It was the same one from the recon squad's final message. "So you're his lieutenant," Gladion said, raising his blade. The Metagross didn't respond. It simply raised a claw, and a wave of pure psychic force, devoid of any thought or emotion, slammed into Gladion. He grunted, bracing himself, the dark energy of his blade absorbing some of the impact. This thing was on another level. It was far stronger than the other hollows. "Silverly, crush claw," Gladion commanded. Silverly charged, but the hollow Metagross was unbelievably fast. It sidestepped, and a psychic pulse sent Silverly crashing into the wall. This wasn't a battle of strategy. It was a confrontation with a void. The climax was converging from three directions. On the surface, Ash, mounted on Charizard, finally faced Silas in the sky. "Your efforts are futile, King of Alola," Silas's voice echoed as their Pokémon clashed, Charizard's flamethrower against the icy wind-type attacks of Silas's own ride Pokémon, a massive, hollow Braviary. "You cannot stop the dawn of the Great Eclipse." "I'm not trying to stop the dawn," Ash shot back, his eyes blazing. "I'm here to bring it." He held up his fist, the crown of light flaring. Pikachu. Pikachu, who had been riding on Charizard's back, leaped into the air. Ash began the Z pose. "Your Z moves are just echoes of a dying light," Silas declared, raising his own hand. A twisted, dark crystal, a mockery of a Z crystal, glowed on his wrist. He performed a warped, jerky pose. Witness a true ultimate move. The power of perfect silence. Void oblivion. The hollow Braviary screeched, a soundless cry of agony as dark energy was ripped from it, coalescing into a sphere of absolute blackness, a miniature black hole that devoured the light around it. 10 million-volt thunderbolt. Ash roared, pouring all of his hope, his defiance, his love for the noisy, vibrant world into the attack. Pikachu unleashed his rainbow-colored river of power. The beam of pure life and the sphere of perfect death met in the sky above Ether Paradise. The impact was silent. A sphere of warring energy, half brilliant light, half devouring darkness, pulsed violently, shaking the very foundations of the artificial island. At that exact moment, Lily reached the corridor outside Lab 8. She saw the heralds, their backs to her, focused on bringing down the shield. It was about to collapse. She didn't have a team of powerful Pokémon. She had her wits, her courage, and the partner who had been with her through everything. "Magiarna," she whispered, her hand on its cold metal shell. "Bloom Doom. Maximum power. Aim for the ceiling supports." It was a wild, desperate gamble. The ancient mythical Pokémon's chest opened, and it fired a concentrated beam of brilliant green energy, not at the heralds, but at the ceiling above them. The support beams exploded. The ceiling buckled and collapsed, tons of concrete and steel crashing down on the surprised heralds, burying them and their dark technology under a mountain of rubble. The assault on Lab 8 was over. Lily stood panting in the dust-filled corridor, her ears ringing, but a triumphant smile on her face. She had held the line. Simultaneously, in the service tunnels, Gladion was being pushed back. The hollow Metagross was relentless, its emotionless psychic attacks bypassing Silverly's defenses. He was out of options. Brute force wasn't working. Think like Ash, a small, traitorous part of his mind whispered. Don't fight the Pokemon. Fight the trainer. But there was no trainer. There was just the void. Or was there? Gladion looked into the Metagross's empty eyes and remembered Ash in the grotto on Alola. He had reached past the corruption. Gladion couldn't do that. But he could do something else. He held up his blade. Silvally, new target. Don't attack the Metagross. Attack me. Silvally froze, confused. Do it. Gladion roared. Try attack. Now. Trusting his master, Silvally unleashed a blast of fire, ice, and electricity. Gladion didn't dodge. He met the attack with his blade, the dark energy infused within it flaring violently as it absorbed the elemental power. The blade began to glow with a terrifying, unstable light, humming with stolen energy. My turn, Gladion snarled, his body screaming from the strain. He charged, not at the Metagross's body, but at the dead center of its face, where its psychic organs would be. He poured all the raw, chaotic energy his blade had absorbed, along with a desperate shard of his own will, his own spirit, into one final, all-or-nothing strike. Wake up, he roared, plunging the overloaded blade into the hollow's face. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. A tiny, faint spark of red light appeared in the depths of the Metagross's black, empty eyes. The Pokémon shuddered, and a low, pained groan, the first sound it had made, echoed in the corridor. It was the sound of a mind fighting to exist again. The hollow's relentless assault stopped as it stumbled back, confused, its internal void now at war with a single, rekindled spark of its old self. It was broken, but it was no longer Silas's perfect weapon. Gladion had won his own way. Not by healing, but by breaking the machine. In the sky, the sphere of light and dark exploded. The backlash sent both Ash and Silas flying. Ash's Z-move, born of hope and unity, had proven stronger than Silas's power of despair. The void oblivion was shattered. Silas recovered first, his serene mask finally cracked. A line of blood trickled from his nose. He looked at Ash with something other than pity. He looked at him with frustration. You are, unexpectedly resilient, his voice echoed, strained. Then, a new message entered his mind, a report from his failing invasion. The assault on the labs had been repelled. His elite guards were buried. His Alpha Hollow was compromised. He had failed. He gave Ash one last, hard look. This changes nothing. The technology is a convenience, not a necessity. The Great Eclipse is a force of nature. It cannot be stopped. It comes to reclaim its lost light. With a gesture, the portals that had brought his army began to reopen. His heralds and the remaining hollows disengaged, retreating back into the violet-black rifts. You're not getting away. Ash yelled, urging Charizard forward. But Silas had one last parting gift. He pointed to the ether paradise itself. Enjoy the silence. The hollow Steelix that had been lurking in the water roared, a silent, terrible sound, and slammed its entire, massive body against the primary support pillar of the artificial island. There was a catastrophic groan of stressed metal. The entire paradise tilted violently, alarms blaring a new, more terrifying warning, structural collapse. The island was going to sink. Silas smiled his serene smile one last time and vanished into his portal, leaving Ash and the people of Alola to drown. Chapter 6, The Weight of the Dawn. The immediate aftermath of the siege was a symphony of controlled chaos. Ether Paradise wasn't sinking, not yet, but the catastrophic damage to its primary support gyros had left the entire artificial island listing at a terrifying 10-degree angle. Every corridor was a slanted nightmare, every room a disorienting trap. The alarms, a chorus of impending doom, echoed through the wounded structure. Ash, his ears still ringing from the Z-move collision, didn't have a moment's rest. His battle against Silas was over, but the battle for Ether Paradise had just begun. He, along with Kiawe's rangers and the remaining Ether security, orchestrated a massive evacuation. It was a testament to the new spirit of Alola that there was no stampede, no selfish panic. People helped each other, carrying the injured, calming frightened Pokémon, moving with a grim, determined unity. Lily, emerging from the dust and rubble of the sublevels, took command of the structural crisis. Her voice, amplified by the facility's damaged PA system, was a beacon of calm authority in the chaos. She directed engineering teams, her mind, honed by years of studying her father's complex schematics, identifying critical failure points and rerouting power to auxiliary stabilizers. She was fighting to save the body of her home while Ash had been fighting to save its soul. Glad Ion, appearing from the depths with his damaged but victorious Silvally, took on the grim task of securing the hollows. The few that hadn't retreated were now directionless, standing inert like statues. His shadow unit, bruised but resolute, began the delicate process of containing them for study, their faces grim as they handled the soulless husks of what were once living Pokémon. It took 12 agonizing hours. 12 hours of ferrying people and Pokémon to the relative safety of Hawali City, of shoring up groaning support beams, of fighting 1,000 small battles against gravity and fear. Finally, as the real dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the last transport left the tilting island. The main power grid was shut down, the primary alarms fell silent, and an eerie, exhausted quiet descended upon the crippled paradise. Ash stood on the highest point of the listing deck, watching the last boat disappear towards Melee Island. His clothes were torn and scorched, his body ached with a weariness that went far beyond muscle fatigue. He had won. He had driven Silas away. But as he looked at the smoking ruins, the shattered windows, and the unnatural tilt of the island against the horizon, it felt like a catastrophic loss. The cost of his kingship was becoming terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just his own safety on the line anymore. It was everything and everyone he had sworn to protect. The days that followed were a blur of grim responsibility. Fear, a cold and creeping vine, began to twist its way through Alola. The economy, which had been stabilizing, went into a nosedive. The attack on Ether Paradise, the heart of Alola's technology and research, was a crippling blow to the region's confidence. Fishermen were afraid to go out to sea. Merchants from other regions cancelled their trade agreements. The sky itself seemed to have taken on a permanent, sickly twilight hue, the stars less bright, the sun's warmth muted, as if Silas's parting words were a prophecy already coming to pass. Ash found himself trapped in an endless cycle of war councils. The Kahunas, his friends, Luzamin, they all looked to him for answers, for a plan. But what plan was there against an enemy who could appear anywhere, who commanded an army that felt no pain, and who served a god of nothingness? He sat at the head of the long conference table in the temporary command center they had established at the Pokémon School, the place where all this had begun. The mood was somber. Spreadsheets on holographic displays showed the grim reality: food shortages were predicted within a month, medical supplies were running low, and public morale was at an all-time low. "The old guard is using this," Nanu stated, his voice flat as he stirred a cup of tea. "Lady Kahale and her cronies are spreading whispers. They're saying the outsider king brought this doom upon us. That his fight with this Silas has marked Alola for destruction. It's finding fertile ground. My rangers are doing their best to counter the misinformation," Kiawe said, his voice strained with exhaustion. "But it's hard to tell people to have hope when they're afraid to let their children play outside. We need a military response," a grim-faced Ether security commander argued. "We need to fortify the islands, establish a standing army. Turn Alola into a fortress." "And what then?" Mallow countered, her voice trembling slightly. "We hide behind walls for the rest of our lives. That's not Alola. That's not Ohana." The arguments swirled around Ash, a vortex of fear, anger, and despair. He listened, his face an impassive mask, but inside, he was crumbling. His usual optimism, his unwavering belief that any problem could be solved with enough spirit and a good battle, felt like a naive fantasy. He had faced down legendary Pokémon, criminal organizations, and alternate dimension despots. But this was different. This wasn't a villain to be punched. It was a creeping, existential dread, and it was poisoning everything he loved. He felt the memory of the hollow Metagross, the utter void in its eyes. He remembered the cold, pitying smile on Silas's face. He heard the silent, screaming despair of the corrupted Kommo-o. The darkness they were fighting wasn't just an external enemy, it was a philosophical plague, and he had no idea how to cure it. Ash? Kukui's voice cut through his thoughts. What do you think? What's our next move? Every eye in the room turned to him. They were waiting for the hero, the champion, the king, to give them a rousing speech, to point them in the right direction, to tell them that everything was going to be okay. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just looked at their expectant, desperate faces, and the weight of it all, the sinking island, the darkening sky, the fear in his friend's eyes, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He felt like a fraud. A simple trainer from Pallet Town who had stumbled into a role he was laughably unqualified for. Without a word, he pushed his chair back, stood up, and walked out of the room. He ignored the confused, worried calls of his friends. He just walked, his movements stiff and automatic, needing to get away, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the smell of failure. He ended up on a secluded stretch of beach, far from the lights of Hawali City. The same beach where he'd first arrived in Alola, full of wonder and excitement. Now, it felt alien, hostile. The twilight sky cast the waves in a dull, leaden gray. He sank to his knees in the cool sand, the fight finally gone from him. Pikachu nudged his hand, letting out a soft, questioning chirp. Ash reached out and stroked his partner's head, his touch listless. "I can't do it, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know how. I can battle. I can fight. But this is different. I'm not a king. I'm just a kid in over his head. And everyone's looking at me to save them, and I'm letting them all down." A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, angry at his own weakness. He was supposed to be the strong one. He stayed there for what felt like hours, watching the gray waves roll in, each one a fresh wave of self-doubt. He was so lost in his own despair that he didn't hear the soft footsteps in the sand behind him until she was right there. "I thought I might find you here." Lily's voice was gentle, not judging, not pitying. Just, present. He didn't turn around, too ashamed to let her see him like this. He just stared out at the endless, darkening water. She didn't say anything else. She just came and sat down next to him in the sand, pulling her knees to her chest, and stared out at the ocean with him. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the mournful rhythm of the waves. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a shared quiet, a comfortable space that she had created just by being there. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and raw. "They want me to be a king. To have all the answers. To make speeches and command armies. I can't do that, Lily. That's not me." "I know," she said softly. "I failed," he continued, the words tumbling out now, a confession he hadn't even admitted to himself. "I beat Silas, but he still won. He broke a piece of Alola. A piece of me. When I looked into that hollow Metagross's eyes, there was nothing there. No anger, no sadness, just empty space. How do you fight that? How do you punch a hole?" "You don't," she said, turning to look at him, her silver-green eyes luminous in the twilight. "You fill it." He finally looked at her, his own eyes full of confusion and pain. "Don't you see it, Ash?" she said, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "You've been trying to be the king everyone else thinks you should be. The one from the storybooks. The commander, the strategist, the politician. But that's not why the Tapus chose you. She reached out and gently took his hand. Her touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in his heart. They didn't choose you because you had all the answers. They chose you because you are the answer. They chose you because of what you did on Alola. You didn't fight the totem. You healed it. You didn't defeat it with power, you filled its emptiness with your own light. You reminded it of what it meant to be alive. Her grip on his hand tightened. That's our weapon against Silas. Not armies, not fortresses. It's you. Your ridiculous, stubborn, unbreakable empathy. Your ability to connect with anyone and anything. Silas wants to create a silent, empty universe. You fight him by being loud. By laughing, by crying, by fighting for every last spark of life, no matter how small. She looked at him, her gaze so full of unwavering belief that it took his breath away. You feel like a fraud because you're trying to wear a crown that doesn't fit. But the crown isn't the title. It's not the power. It's you, Ash. It's your heart. Stop trying to be the king they want. Just be the Ash they need. His defenses crumbled. Everything he had been holding in, the fear, the doubt, the crushing weight of it all, was washed away by the simple, profound power of her faith in him. He saw himself reflected in her eyes, not as a failure, but as the person she saw. The person who could heal a totem, who could trust his Pokémon, who could inspire a region. How, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. How are you so sure? Lily gave him a small, watery smile. Because I was lost in my own darkness once. I was afraid of everything. I was so scared I couldn't even touch a Pokémon. And then I met a boy from Pallet Town who was loud, and reckless, and who stubbornly refused to let me be afraid. He showed me what it was like to connect, to trust, to be brave. Her thumb gently caressed the back of his hand. You didn't just save Nebby, Ash. You saved me. The unspoken thing that had been growing between them for months finally broke the surface. The deep friendship, the battlefield partnership, the shared traumas and triumphs, it all coalesced into this single, perfect moment of vulnerability and truth on a lonely beach. He looked at her, truly saw her. Not just as his friend, his advisor, or Gladion's sister. He saw the strong, brilliant, compassionate woman she had become, the person who had stood by him without question, who had faced down her own fears to save her home, who had just walked into his personal darkness and single-handedly chased the shadows away. He didn't plan it. He didn't think about it. He just leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss, full of explosive passion. It was soft, hesitant, and full of a profound, desperate gratitude. It was a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were soft, and for a moment, she was still with surprise. Then, she relaxed, melting into him, her free hand coming up to gently cup his cheek. The kiss deepened, becoming a silent conversation, a confirmation of everything they both had been feeling but were too afraid or too busy to say. When they finally broke apart, they just looked at each other, the space between them charged with a new, beautiful intimacy. The world hadn't changed. The sky was still dark. The threat was still real. But Ash no longer felt alone in it. The crushing weight on his shoulders was still there, but it was no longer his to bear alone. She was sharing it with him. You're right, he said, his voice quiet but clear, the doubt gone, replaced by a new, calmer resolve. I've been trying to fight his war. Now, we're going to make him fight ours. He found his strength again, not the boisterous confidence of the undefeatable hero, but the quiet, resolute strength of a man who knew what, and who, he was fighting for. He was fighting for the home that had chosen him, and for the woman who believed in him. As if in response to his renewed spirit, the crown of light on his wrist, which had been dull for days, pulsed with a soft, warm glow. He stood up, pulling her to her feet with him. He looked not at the worried faces in the war room, but beyond, to the people of Alola. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to give a speech about military strategy. He was going to give them back their hope. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice full of a depth of emotion that made her heart ache. She just smiled, her hand still in his. "Anytime, Your Majesty." The title wasn't mocking or formal. It was affectionate, a shared secret. They walked back from the beach, hand in hand, towards the light of the city. The path forward was still uncertain and fraught with peril, but for the first time in days, Ash Ketchum felt ready to walk it. Far away, on the ruined, remote island at the edge of the archipelago, the small crack in the earth had become a gaping, pulsating chasm. The violet-black energy pouring from it was no longer a wisp, it was a torrent, a river of silent darkness that coiled into the twilight sky. Silas stood at the edge of the chasm, his hands outstretched. He had failed to acquire the Ether Foundation's technology, but his master was impatient. He was now powering the rift with his own life force, and the stolen energy of the countless hollows he had created. The stolen ether data had given him the coordinates, the correct dimensional frequency. Now, all he needed was raw power. The sky above the chasm began to warp and tear, the fabric of reality groaning under the strain. A colossal ultra-wormhole, far larger and more unstable than any seen before, was beginning to rip its way into existence directly over the heart of Alola. The countdown had not been reset. It had been dangerously accelerated. The eclipse was no longer coming. It was here. Chapter 7, The Silent Eclipse. The sky broke. It happened just after dawn, a dawn that was already unnervingly dim. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, resonant wrongness that vibrated through the very bones of the islands. Every Pokémon in Alola fell silent at once. The cheerful morning chorus of Pikipek, the gentle lowing of Miltank, the playful splashing of Wishiwashi, all of it vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound, and terrifying hush. Then came the visual. High in the atmosphere, directly over the central point between the four main islands, the twilight sky began to tear. It wasn't a clean rip, but a festering, violent wound in the fabric of reality. A colossal ultra-wormhole, unlike any ever witnessed, was being clawed into existence. It was a swirling vortex of violet and black, pulsing with a malevolent, silent energy that seemed to suck the very light and color from the surrounding clouds. Alola held its breath. This was it. The silent eclipse had arrived. In the command center at the Pokémon School, the mood was electric with a focused, grim resolve. The despair that had crippled them days ago was gone, replaced by the steely determination Ash had ignited. He stood before the main holographic display, which showed a terrifying, real-time image of the growing wormhole. He was no longer the lost boy on the beach. He was a king, calm and resolute, his presence a grounding force for everyone in the room. Lily was at his side, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm, their connection a visible, tangible source of strength. "Glad Ion, report," Ash said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Gladion's face appeared on a secondary screen, broadcast from the windy deck of a high-speed Ether Foundation vessel. He was racing towards the remote island where the wormhole was anchored. "The energy readings are off the charts. It's a massive siphon. Silas is using it as a beacon to guide whatever is on the other side. My team is preparing to make landfall and destroy the device, but he'll have the island heavily fortified." "Understood," Ash replied. "Your mission is our first priority. Cut the head off the snake. Without that beacon, the wormhole might become unstable. And if it doesn't?" Gladion's voice was tight. "Then we deal with what comes through," Ash said grimly. He turned to the four kahunas, who were linked in from their respective islands. "Hala, Olivia, Nanu, Hapu. It's time." Hala nodded, his face solemn. "The people are ready. They are frightened, but they have not lost hope. We are putting our faith in you," Ash Ketchum, Hapu added, her youthful face set with a wisdom far beyond her years. "In all of you. The plan is set," Ash declared, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for doubt. The Rangers and Ether Security will form the first line of defense on each island, protecting the civilians. But the main shield is up to you. You must perform the Grand Trial Z move, the Guardian's Aegis. It's our only hope of buying enough time. The Guardian's Aegis was a near-mythical coordinated rite, a simultaneous Z move performed by all four kahunas, channeling the faith of their people and the power of the Tapus not into an attack, but into a colossal, island-spanning defensive shield of pure spiritual energy. It had not been attempted in over 500 years. "We will not fail," Olivia said, her usual rock-and-roll bravado replaced by a fierce, protective fire. Nanu just gave a curt, single nod, the closest he ever came to a display of solidarity. "Lily," Ash said, turning to her. "Solgaleo and Lunala are with me," she confirmed, gesturing to another screen showing the two legendary Pokémon, their forms radiating a brilliant, defiant light as they hovered near the Pokémon school. Nebby, now a magnificent Solgaleo, let out a rumbling roar of affirmation. "We're ready to channel their light, to reinforce the weakest points of the shield and create safe zones for the evacuation stragglers." "Good," Ash said. He took a deep breath. The pieces were in place. This was his strategy, born not from a military textbook, but from his own philosophy, a plan built entirely on trust, unity, and the bonds between people and Pokémon. He looked around the room, at his friends, his mentors, his allies. He saw fear in their eyes, yes, but he also saw courage. He saw love for their home. He saw Ohana. "No matter what comes through that wormhole," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet, powerful belief, "we face it together. As one Alola." At that moment, the wormhole violently convulsed. A presence, ancient and immense, began to emerge. It was not a beast of rage and fury. It was a being of profound, cosmic sorrow. Necrozma. But it was a twisted, broken version of the Prism Pokémon. It was a fractured nightmare of black crystal and living shadow, its form constantly shifting, breaking apart and reforming. It didn't have a face, but Ash could feel its gaze, a gaze of infinite, weary hatred for the light. Tendrils of tangible darkness, the very essence of the silent eclipse, coiled around it, and its mere presence radiated an aura of absolute silence, a psychic pressure that felt like the death of all sound, all thought, all life. It didn't roar. It didn't attack. It simply descended, a silent god of oblivion, and the world beneath it began to die. As it passed through the upper atmosphere, the brilliant blue of the sky was consumed, replaced by an inky, starless black. A wave of its silent, sorrowful energy washed over the islands. Plants withered. The vibrant colors of the world faded to a monochrome gray. People fell to their knees, not from a physical blow, but from a sudden, crushing wave of utter despair, the feeling that all hope was lost, that all struggle was meaningless. "Now!" Ash roared into the comms, fighting against the wave of despair with the sheer force of his will, his Zering flaring like a miniature sun. "Unleash the Aegis." On each of the 4 islands, the kahunas acted. On Mele Mele, Hala stood before the ruins of conflict, his arms raised, his Zering glowing. The people of his island, gathered in the towns and on the beaches, all focused their hope, their spirit, on him. For Mele Mele. For Alola, he bellowed, and performed the Z-pose. On Akala, Olivia stood atop the volcano at Wella Park, a defiant silhouette against the dying sky. On Ula Ula, Nanu stood grimly before his people at Malie Garden. On Pony, Hapu stood at the entrance to the vast Pony Canyon. For simultaneous sea moves. For colossal pillars of light, yellow, pink, purple, and green, erupted from the islands, soaring into the sky. They converged beneath the descending Necrozma, weaving together to form a shimmering, semi-transparent dome of pure energy that covered the heart of the archipelago. The Guardian's Aegis was formed. The moment the shield solidified, the crushing wave of despair was blunted, its intensity lessened. The colors of the world, though still muted, stopped fading. The shield was holding. It had bought them time. It's working. Sophocles yelled from his console, relief flooding his face. But their fight was just beginning. Necrozma, seeing the defiant light of the shield, finally reacted. It didn't attack the shield directly. Instead, it extended a dozen massive tendrils of shadow, which plunged into the sea around the islands. Moments later, the ocean began to boil. From the depths, an army of hollows rose. Not just the Pokemon Silas had corrupted, but horrifying, twisted amalgamations of sea life, hollow Sharpedo with dead eyes, monstrous hollow Tentacruel, and even a colossal, skeletal hollow Wylord that breached the surface with an awful, silent cry. They began to assault the shores of the islands, a tide of death crashing against the defenses of the Rangers. They're trying to break the concentration of the people. Lana realized, her face pale. If the people panic, the Kahunas lose their power source, and the shield will fail. The Rangers will hold them, Ash said, his jaw tight. I trust them. He turned to Lily. Your turn. Lily nodded, her expression serene and focused. She stood between Solgaleo and Lunala, her hands outstretched. Now, she whispered. The two legendary Pokemon unleashed their power. Solgaleo fired a brilliant beam of solar energy, Sunsteel Strike, while Lunala unleashed a shimmering Moongeist beam. The attacks didn't strike an enemy. They flew to the canopy of the Guardian's Aegis, spreading across its surface like liquid light, reinforcing it, patching the small fractures that were beginning to appear under Necrozma's oppressive aura. They were the mortar holding the bricks of the shield together. On the remote island, Gladion and his team stormed the beach. They were met by a fanatical defense. The last of Silas's heralds, along with dozens of his strongest hollows, were guarding the chasm and the complex dimensional siphon at its edge. The battle was immediate and brutal. Gladion's shadows moved with practiced lethality, but they were outnumbered. Gladion himself fought like a demon, his dark blade a blur, cutting a path directly towards the siphon. Silvally, fire memory. He commanded, swapping out Silvali's memory drive. With a burst of flame, Silvali's multi-attack incinerated a hollow executor that blocked their path. He had to get to the beacon. High above, Ash knew his role. He couldn't fight the ground war. He couldn't maintain the shield. His purpose was singular. He had to face the god of silence himself. Charizard, let's go, he yelled, leaping onto his Pokemon's back. Pikachu scrambled up behind him. Ash, wait. Lily cried out, her composure finally cracking with fear for him. He looked back at her, and in the midst of the apocalypse, he gave her a bright, confident, world-changing smile. I'll be back, he promised. Charizard roared and launched into the darkened sky, flying straight up towards the bottom of the shield. Lily, open a path for him. Kukui yelled into the comms. Lily, her heart in her throat, nodded. Solgaleo. Focus your light. Right above us. Solgaleo roared, and a concentrated beam of solar energy struck the Aegis, creating a temporary, shimmering gate in the shield. Ash, Charizard, and Pikachu shot through it, entering the terrifying, silent space between the shield and the monster. The moment they were through, the pressure hit them. The absolute, soul-crushing silence and despair. It was 1,000 times worse than it had been on the ground. Charizard faltered, its wings struggling. Pikachu whimpered, the sparks on his cheeks dying. Ash felt his consciousness start to fray, the whispers of the void tempting him with the sweet release of nothingness. No. He grit his teeth, focusing on the image of Lily's face, her hand in his. He poured his own aura, his own defiant life force, out, wrapping it around his two partners in a cocoon of warm, golden light. I've got you, he yelled over the psychic silence. Don't give in. We're in this together. Charizard roared, a real, audible sound of defiance in the oppressive quiet, and beat its wings harder, resuming their climb. Pikachu's sparks reignited, crackling with renewed vigor. They were a single, tiny spark of life ascending into an infinite, silent darkness. They finally came face to face with Necrozma. It was a being the size of a mountain, a living monument to pain. As Ash drew closer, he could see the truth of it. The black crystals were a prison, a shell of hardened despair encasing a core of brilliant, fractured light, the remnants of its true form. It was a dying star that had collapsed in on itself. Necrozma! Ash yelled, his voice amplified by his aura, the only sound in this dead space. I know you're in there. I know you're in pain. Silas is wrong. Silence isn't peace. Let us help you. For the first time, Necrozma focused its full attention on the tiny gnat of defiance before it. A wave of pure, concentrated despair, a vision of a billion years spent alone in the dark, slammed into Ash's mind. It was an attack meant to shatter his sanity. Ash screamed, clutching his head, but he did not break. He had seen this before. He had felt this on Alola. He pushed back with his own memories, his own joy. But as he fought the psychic assault, a figure shot up from the island below, moving with impossible speed. Silas. He hovered between Ash and Necrozma, his face a mask of cold, fanatical fury. His clothes were torn, and he was bleeding from a wound on his arm, a gift from Gladion's assault, but his eyes burned with holy fire. You will not defile my God with your noise. Silas's voice screamed in Ash's mind. He was mounted on his own ultimate hollow, a terrifying, skeletal salamence. He has suffered enough. The great eclipse is his final, merciful release. And I will be the one to grant it to him. The final battle began in the silent, darkened sky. Ash and Pikachu on Charizard against Silas and his hollow salamence, with the sorrowful, dying god of prisms as their backdrop. It was a battle of unbelievable ferocity. Charizard's dragon claws met the hollow's shadow claws in a shower of sparks. Pikachu's thunderbolt was countered by a torrent of dragon pulse. But Silas fought with a desperate, suicidal fervor, constantly putting himself between Ash and Necrozma, protecting his god. Meanwhile, Necrozma itself had begun its final gambit. It ignored the tiny battle raging before it and turned its attention to the two sources of brilliant light it coveted. It extended two colossal tendrils of shadow down towards the shield. The tendrils phased through the Guardian's aegis as if it weren't even there, ignoring the people and Pokémon it protected, and shot towards two specific targets, Solgaleo and Lunala. Lily screamed as the shadow claws wrapped around the two struggling legendary Pokémon, their light flickering violently. It's trying to absorb them. Burnett yelled from the command center. Not like it did with Nebby before. It's trying to extinguish them. To merge with them and create a being of pure anti-light. This was its true goal. Not to become Ultra Necrozma, but to become the polar opposite. To become the vessel of the silent eclipse, a living black hole of existence that would consume all light and life. Ash, you have to stop him. Lily's panicked voice cried over the calm, Necrozma's got Solgaleo and Lunala. Ash heard her. He tried to get past Silas, but the herald was relentless. You see. Silas's voice was triumphant. It is inevitable. The fusion has begun. Soon, the final piece will begin. On the island below, Gladion finally broke through the last line of defense. He stood before the dimensional siphon, a massive, complex machine of ether tech and twisted, alien metal, humming with catastrophic power. He plunged his blade into its control panel. The machine sparked and sputtered, and the beam of energy shooting into the sky wavered. The wormhole flickered violently. But it was too late. The connection had been established for too long. The wormhole, though now unstable, remained open. A feedback loop of dark energy erupted from the siphon, throwing Gladion and Silvally back. The mission was a partial success, but it wasn't enough. The war for Alola had reached its terrible, desperate climax. The shield was failing as the Kahunas were forced to divert their energy to protecting their people from the hollow tide. Gladion had been wounded, the beacon damaged but not destroyed. Solgaleo and Lunala were being consumed, their light fading by the second. And Ash was locked in a desperate battle with a zealot, unable to get to the one being he might be able to save. They were losing. Ash looked down and saw the light of his legendary friends guttering like dying candles. He heard Lily's desperate pleas. He saw the cracks spreading across the Guardian's aegis. His way, the way of hope and trust, had led them here, to the brink of annihilation. For a single, terrible moment, he felt the despair win. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe the struggle was pointless. Then he looked at Pikachu, who was staring back at him, his small black eyes filled not with fear, but with a simple, unwavering question, "What's next, Ash?" And he remembered. He was not alone. He looked at Silas, at the hollow Salamence, at the colossal, dying god behind them. He finally understood. Force could not win this war. An attack would not save them. To fight Necrozma was to validate its belief that existence was only pain and violence. To attack it now would be to attack Solgaleo and Lunala as well. He had to make a king's choice. Not a choice of strategy, but of faith. He closed his eyes, ignoring Silas's attacks, and reached out with his mind, with his aura, broadcasting a single, desperate command to every one of his allies. To Lily, to Gladion, to the Kahunas, to his rangers, to every person in Alola. Stop fighting. Chapter 8, A King's Light. The command was not a suggestion. It was a wave of pure, potent will that washed over the embattled islands of Alola, transmitted through the spiritual network of the Guardian's aegis and amplified by the power of Ash's own Zeering. It was a king's decree, spoken not with words, but with soul. Stop fighting. On the shores of Mele, Kiawe, mounted on his Charizard, was about to unleash a devastating inferno against a colossal hollow Tentacruel. He froze, the fire dying in his throat, as his king's command echoed in his mind. He looked around at his exhausted rangers, at the relentless, silent tide of hollows, and then up at the darkening sky. He didn't understand. But he trusted. Hold your positions. He roared. Defensive stances only. In the dark service corridors of Ether Paradise, Gladion was struggling to his feet, his blade humming with dark energy, ready to re-engage the short-circuiting but still dangerous hollow Metagross. He stopped, his head cocked, as his rival's voice resonated in his thoughts. "Don't be my shadow, be my shield." The words from their duel came back to him. This was it. The ultimate test of that trust. With a snarl of frustration, he lowered his blade. "Silvally, stand down." In the command center, Lily heard his voice, felt his intent, and her heart seized with terror. Stop fighting. Now. It was madness. But then she looked at the screen showing Ash, high in the sky, his face set with a terrifying, absolute certainty. She remembered their conversation on the beach. "You don't punch a hole. You fill it." She understood. Her fear for him was eclipsed by a surge of pure, unshakable faith. "Do it," she commanded into the comms, her voice ringing with authority. "All forces, cease offensive maneuvers. I repeat, cease all attacks. Focus all energy on defense and protection." The effect across Alola was instantaneous and bizarre. The cacophony of battle, the explosions of Pokémon attacks, the rallying cries of trainers, died down, replaced by an eerie quiet. The defenders formed walls of light and energy, protecting the civilians, but they no longer struck back at the hollows. The silent army, with no instinct but to attack, continued their assault, crashing harmlessly against shields of light and walls of stone. High above, Silas faltered, his hollow Salamence shadow claw dissipating harmlessly as Ash's Charizard simply hovered, making no move to dodge or counter. "What is this foolishness?" Silas's voice screamed in Ash's mind, laced with confusion. "Have you surrendered? Have you finally accepted the peace of the eclipse?" "No," Ash projected back, his voice calm and clear. He opened his eyes, and they were not the eyes of a warrior. They were the eyes of a healer. I'm ending this war. Not by winning, but by refusing to fight it. He looked past Silas, at the colossal, sorrowful form of Necrozma. The legendary Pokémon was still absorbing Solgaleo and Lunala, their light almost entirely extinguished, the dark fusion nearly complete. But for the first time, it seemed to hesitate, its oppressive aura flickering as it sensed the sudden, inexplicable cessation of conflict below. The noise of chaotic existence had stopped. You hate the light because it's violent, Ash projected, his voice resonating with a profound empathy that cut through the psychic static. Because it's chaotic. Because it hurt you. You think peace is silence. But you're wrong. True peace is connection. He held up his left hand, the crown of light on his wrist beginning to glow with an intensity that outshone the dying stars. Lily. Kahunas. Everyone. I need your strength. Not for an attack. For something more. He looked down at the islands, at the millions of people and Pokémon united in a single, desperate moment. Lend me your hearts. Lend me your hope. Lend me your love for Alola. All of it. Every last bit. Channel your Z-power, not into a weapon, but into me. It was an unprecedented request. An insane gamble. But they had already chosen to trust him. On each island, the Kahunas changed their stance. They were no longer holding a defensive line. They became conduits. The energy of the Guardian's Aegis reversed its flow, no longer projecting outwards, but drawing inwards. Drawing from the land, from the sea, from every single living being huddled under its protection. A billion tiny sparks of light, of hope, of fear, of love, of defiance, began to flow from the populace, into the Kahunas, and then up, a torrent of pure, unrefined spiritual energy, into the sky. Lily, standing between the fading forms of Solgaleo and Lunala, did the same. She reached out, not to command them, but to join them. She poured her own spirit, her love for Nebi, her fierce desire to protect her home, into the remaining light of the two legendaries. Their power, combined with her own, joined the massive river of energy flowing upwards. All of it converged on a single point in the sky. On Ash. The power was immense, overwhelming. It felt like trying to hold a star in his hands. His body screamed in protest. It was an agony far beyond any physical blow, the sheer, crushing weight of an entire region's soul. He felt their collective fear, their pain, their flickering hope. He was going to be torn apart. Pikachu, seeing his partner's struggle, let out a defiant cry and leaped onto his shoulder, pressing against him, adding his own small, but infinitely powerful, spark to the inferno. Together. The crown of light on Ash's wrist flared, absorbing the cataclysmic power, shaping it, refining it. It wasn't a gigavolt havoc. It wasn't a 10 million volt thunderbolt. It was something new. Something born of this one, singular moment. Ash didn't even have a name for it. He just knew what it was. It was the light of Alola. You see, he projected to the stunned Necrozma, his voice now a chorus of a million voices. This is the true power of the light. Not the power to destroy. The power to connect. With a final, world-shaking roar that was both his and Alola's, he unleashed it. But he didn't fire it as a beam. He opened his arms and let the light erupt from him, not as an attack, but as an embrace. A gentle, radiant, all-encompassing wave of pure, restorative energy. The light of Alola washed over everything. It hit Silas and his hollow salamence first. The herald screamed, not in pain, but in shock, as the light touched him. It didn't burn. It filled him. It showed him not the chaotic violence he despised, but the quiet moments of connection he had forgotten. The feeling of a mother's hand, the taste of a shared meal, the warmth of a Pokémon's fur. The life he had thrown away in pursuit of a peaceful death. The hollow salamence convulsed, and for the first time in an age, a flicker of its own original life sparked in its eyes. The wave continued, washing over the colossal form of Necrozma. The being of shadow and pain reeled back as if struck. But the light wasn't attacking its prison of darkness. It was seeping through the cracks. It wasn't feeding its hatred of violent energy. It was a gentle, unconditional offering. It was the warmth of a sunbeam after a long winter. It was the quiet comfort of a friend's presence. It was the silent, powerful love of a million souls, offered without demand. It was everything it had lost. Everything it had forgotten. Inside the black crystal shell, the core of fractured light, the true Necrozma, began to respond. It stopped fighting. It stopped hating. It simply accepted the warmth. The dark, parasitic energy of the silent eclipse, the cosmic sorrow that had corrupted it for eons, could not survive in the face of such overwhelming, gentle love. It hissed and recoiled, starved of the anger and despair it fed upon. A backlash of pure void energy, the death throes of the eclipse, erupted from Necrozma's form, aimed directly at the source of the light, at Ash. He was spent, his body failing, held up only by the torrent of energy flowing through him. He saw the wave of utter annihilation coming for him and knew he couldn't stop it. But someone else could. Silas, his face streaked with tears, his serene mask shattered by a terrible, beautiful revelation, moved. The peace he had sought was oblivion. The peace Ash offered was connection. In one final, redemptive act, he threw himself and his now struggling Salamence in the path of the void. "Let there be light," he whispered, as the wave of absolute nothingness hit him. He and his Pokémon were not just destroyed. They were unmade, erased from existence, their sacrifice a final, silent shield for the king who had shown him the truth. Free of the backlash, Ash poured the last of the light of Alola into Necrozma. The result was a silent, beautiful apocalypse. The black crystal prison didn't explode. It dissolved. It sublimated into a trillion motes of dust, revealing the being within. Necrozma was reborn. It was a creature of impossible geometry, a being of pure, dazzling, crystalline light, radiating a power that was not hot or cold, but simply, brilliant. Its true form. Ultra Necrozma. It gently released Solgaleo and Lunala from its grasp, their own light returning to them, brighter than before. The massive, unstable wormhole, its anchor and purpose gone, collapsed in on itself, vanishing with a final, silent implosion. The inky blackness in the sky shattered like glass, revealing the brilliant, warm blue of a true Alolan dawn. The sun, brighter and more beautiful than ever, crested the horizon. Ultra Necrozma hovered in the sky, its radiant light washing over the islands, not with despair, but with a gentle, healing warmth. The last of the hollows on the ground below simply stopped. The void within them, no longer powered by the eclipse, evaporated. They slumped to the ground, no longer hollow, but simply unconscious Pokémon, their spirits waiting to be rekindled. The silent, sorrowful god of prisms was a god of light once more. It turned its multifaceted gaze upon the small human and his Pikachu, who were now drifting, exhausted, in the sky. It did not speak, but Ash felt its voice in his mind, a sound like chiming crystals and starlight. A single, profound feeling, gratitude. It bowed its head, a gesture of immense respect from one cosmic power to another. Then, it turned, opened a clean, stable ultra wormhole, and departed, not as a destroyer, but as the guardian of light it was always meant to be. The war was over. Ash's strength finally gave out. The connection to Alola's soul faded. He and Pikachu began to fall from the sky. He closed his eyes, a weary, contented smile on his face. He had done it. He had protected his home. He didn't hit the water. Strong, familiar wings caught him. He opened his eyes to see the concerned face of his Charizard, who had weathered the storm and come for him. He looked down. The ocean was filled with boats. Every boat in Alola, it seemed, had come out to the base of Ether Paradise. And as Charizard descended, a sound began to build. It started as a single cheer, then then 1,000, then 100,000. A deafening, joyous, tearful roar of pure love and adulation from the people he had saved. They weren't cheering for a king or a champion. They were cheering for their Ash. Epilogue 6 months later, Alola was thriving. The scars of the siege were healing, a testament to the indefatigable spirit of the islands. Ether Paradise, now fully repaired and recommissioned, stood as a gleaming white symbol of their resilience. The sky was a brilliant, permanent blue. The economy had not just recovered, it had boomed, fueled by a new sense of national pride and unity. The King's Rangers were a beloved institution, a core part of Alolan life. The old guard nobles, humbled and stripped of their power to cause trouble, now vied for the honor of being the primary benefactors of ranger-sponsored conservation projects. Ash stood on the balcony of what had once been Luzamon's office, now his and Lily's shared living quarters. He wasn't wearing a crown, just a simple, comfortable Alolan shirt. The crown of light on his wrist was no longer a symbol of a title, but a quiet, personal reminder of his connection to this land. He watched the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of gentle pink and gold. The door slid open, and Lily came out to join him, leaning against him and resting her head on his shoulder. She was no longer just his advisor, she was his partner in every sense of the word. A queen not by title, but by the quiet, steady strength with which she governed and cared for her people. Another council meeting tomorrow, she said with a soft, contented sigh. Hapu wants to propose a new agricultural program using what we learned from the blight to enrich the soil. Sounds like a good idea, Ash said, his arm wrapping around her. And Gladon? He and his shadows just finished tracking down the last of Silas's abandoned technology, she reported. He says he needs a vacation. I think he's going to go challenge the battle tree. For fun. She smiled. He seems lighter. We all are, Ash said quietly. He looked out at the peaceful ocean, at the lights of Hawali City beginning to twinkle in the distance. He had come to this region seeking new battles, new Pokémon, the next step on an endless journey. He had found something he never knew he was looking for, a purpose. A home. His journey hadn't ended. It had simply changed. The adventure was no longer about seeing how strong he could become. It was about seeing how strong he could help others be. It was the thrill of a new ranger graduating, the victory of a species being brought back from the brink of extinction, the quiet joy of watching his friends, his family, his people, thrive in the peace he had fought so hard to protect. Pikachu hopped onto the railing, looking out at the new dawn with them. Thinking of leaving? Lily asked, her voice teasing, echoing Professor Kukui's words from so long ago on a night that felt like a lifetime away. Ash looked at her, at the love and trust shining in her eyes, and smiled. Never, he said, and he knew it was the truest thing he had ever said. He leaned down and kissed her, a soft, familiar gesture full of the promise of 1,000 more sunsets to come. The adventure was just beginning. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.